I still remember the call coming in at 2:03 a.m. on a Tuesday. Dispatch's voice clipped and tense, like they tasted the line static before speaking. Unit 12, we've had reports of lights inside Sector C at Port Havelock. You're closest. Check in when you get there. I clicked off the radio, my pulse already picking up the slack. Port Havelock was supposed to be shuttered for 20 years. Decommissioned chemical tests, sealed up tight. There wasn't supposed to be anyone left on the perimeter, let alone working lights. The road out there was nothing but a narrow strip of gravel cutting through marshland. The wind had picked up after midnight, so by the time I reached the broken gate, my cruiser rattled against the gusts like a tin can. I killed the engine and killed my headlights, leaving the dashboard glow as the only indicator that I was still alive. My flashlight felt heavy in my hand, the beam unsteady against the fence's barbed loops. Every strand of wire looked sharp enough to shred skin, but one section sagged just enough to slip through. I squeezed under and dropped silently into the darkness. The billet buildings sat in a semicircle, their windows glowing faintly like dead eyes reflecting car headlights. My breath fogged in front of my face, each plume lasting half a second before fading into the night. I crouched low, boots sinking slightly into the mud. The air smelled of brine and rust, iron leaching from buried pipes or something rotting beneath the surface. I scanned the buildings one by one, each shadow-driven corner more menacing than the last. No patrol lights, no other cruisers, just me and that low hum, like an animal exhaling through a broken grate. I moved up the gravel path toward the center building, radar radio clipped to my vest, pistol at ready. The concrete walls were fractured, vines climbing like prison bars. I came to the door marked C-3. The fluorescent light above it flickered in pulses I couldn't track, slower than any bulb I'd seen. My radio crackled. Unit 12, status? I hesitated, thumb hovering. I'm on site. No sign of forced entry. Lights must be on internal. The reply was lost in static, but I caught enough to know dispatch was uneasy. Inside, the hallway stretched into shadows, broken tiles crunching under my boots. I swept the beam side to side. I expected empty corridors, maybe a rat scurrying off into the walls. Instead, I saw footprints, barely visible tracks and dust along the threshold. Size 11, mud spattered on the tile, leading down the hall. Whoever was here was careful enough to wipe their hands on their trousers, but they didn't bother with their boots. I followed them, each step echoing off the ceiling like a question shouted in a canyon. At the end of the hall, a stairwell led down. The walls bore stenciled warnings. Caution, chemical residue, but the labels were half erased. My light revealed a slick sheen on the steps, water, oil, I couldn't tell. I descended, each footfall measured so I wouldn't slip or give away my position. The hum grew louder, throbbing in time with my heartbeat. The stairwell opened into a vast maintenance bay. Rows of sealed vaults lined the walls. Heavy doors numbered 1 through 12. Vault 7 was ajar, a sliver of warm light showing inside. I edged closer. The smell hit me first, acrid, metallic, like burnt wires dipped in bleach. My flashlight beam entered the vault and froze. Inside was a crude workbench illuminated by a single hanging lamp, wires dangling like pendants. Tools lay scattered, bolt cutters, pry bars, a small hammer. Underneath the bench, a roll of thick cable snaked into the darkness. On the bench was a notepad, its pages smeared with black oil. I picked it up with gloved hands. The first entry read, Phase 1, Establish Power. Beneath that, a schematic, a hand-drawn generator hooked to an unknown device, labeled Only at Night, Do Not Speak. My radio went dead. The sudden silence pressed against my eardrums until I half expected to hear blood rushing. I dropped the notepad back onto the bench and turned to leave, but the vault door slammed shut with a force that rattled the charted schematics. I yanked it open. The latch felt stiff, like it had seized under pressure. When I swung around again, the light was off. The hum persisted, but I was alone in near blackness, flashlight flickering as if protesting. I retraced my steps toward the stairwell, but halfway there I noticed a line of fresh footprints at a right angle, leading deeper into a shadowed alcove I hadn't seen before. Someone had carved a thin path in the wall, a maintenance hatch, now left open, revealing a yellow glow coming from below. I knelt down, the air blowing out in front of my face like a whispered warning. The hatch was just big enough to climb through. The glow pulsed at the edges with a slow, rhythmic throb. I should have backed away, called wait for backup, drawn an imaginary line I would not cross. But every cop knows the draw of things that shouldn't be on a map. I hoisted myself into the hatch and dropped onto cold concrete in a low-ceilinged crawl space. The throb was louder here, almost tactile as it vibrated through the boards beneath my knees. I edged forward, feeling my way against damp walls slick with condensation. Above me, pipes rattled, and sighs echoed. Ventilation systems that hadn't worked in decades. The passage opened into another chamber, larger and boxy. A generator sat in the middle, its blades spinning slowly, fed by cables jolting with sparks where insulation had melted away. Next to it, a welding torch lay abandoned, still warm enough to burn. The entire room glowed orange, throwing shadows that danced across rusted barrels stenciled "Toxic" and "Has Do Not Enter." I expected the generator to be old, but it was too new, freshly painted, as if installed yesterday. I stepped closer, every nerve firing. The floor around the generator was wet with oil and water mixed, so the footprints I left slipped and vanished in the sheen. I dropped to my knees and rubbed my glove across the floor. No dust, just that slick surface. If someone had been here, they'd left long ago, but the hum said otherwise. Someone, or something, was keeping this alive. I rose and scanned for exits, finding only the hatch I'd climbed down. As I turned back to the generator, the torch sparked to life, its light flaring blue-white for a fraction of a second. I jerked back, heart slamming into my ribs. The operator's gloves lay draped over the torch handle, as if someone had paused mid-task. My flashlight beam trembled as I approached. The gloves were too small for mine, delicate, lined with red stitching. I slipped them on instinctively. The second I flexed my fingers, the generator's hum flickered, stuttered, then steadied into a deeper tone, like a breath exhaled through a tube. The torch flared again behind me. I whirled, gun drawn, but saw only the welding arm, motionless, its tip blistered from use. My radio crackled weakly, the static forming words I couldn't fully catch. Emergency, evacuation, contamination. The hatch latch rattled. My teeth ground together as I aimed toward the sound. Footsteps echoed above, soft and deliberate. The hatch shook as if someone was testing its weight. My pulse drummed in my ears. I whispered into my radio, voice shaking. Dispatch, obstacles. Hatch breach imminent. I need... It cut out. The footsteps paused. Silence. Then a low metallic click, like a lock disengaging. I backed up toward the torch, heart pounding so hard I felt it against my back. The controller panel beside the generator flickered on, screens illuminating in succession, displaying lines of text I didn't recognize, coordinates, timestamps, and a blinking phrase, "Activate before dawn." My breath caught. Dawn was hours away. The hatch creaked open. A sliver of orange light spilled in, I swallowed and squared my shoulders. Whoever or whatever was coming wouldn't catch me kneeling. I stood, gun raised, and watched the bottom of 2 boots descend into the room, their soles fresh, unmarked by mud or dust. The hum deepened into a resonance that rattled my bones. My throat went dry as I steadied my aim at the boots, expecting to see a face. But the moment I locked eyes with the figure emerging into the chamber, everything went black. The generator's throb became a roar in my skull, and I knew then how fragile this place was, how small I was against its secrets, and I wondered, a sliver of thought before darkness swallowed me, whether I was meant to leave at all. I came to on the cold concrete floor, chest burning as though I'd sprinted a mile, despite the fact I'd been standing still. My flashlight spun in my hand, beam slicing through the haze of dust motes and whatever else had turned this sub-basement into its own ecosystem. The air tasted of oil and metal, like licking a battery. My ears still rang from that final resonance, and I realized I was staring at the boots, shiny black, no trace of dirt, standing motionless only a few feet away. The rest of the figure remained in shadow. My hand trembled on the pistol grip. "Who the hell are you?" I croaked, voice ragged. No answer. The boots shifted forward, gently, as though testing the floorboards. My stomach knotted. I flicked off my flashlight, plunging the room into the generator's orange glow, swirling shadows that seemed to detach from the walls. The boots moved again, closer to the console. Sparks crackled where the torch lay, tiny arcs of blue and white that cast grotesque silhouettes across barrels stamped with warnings. I risked a glance down the figure's legs. Jeans, dark, tucked into well-polished tactical boots that looked new. Above the knees, fabric disappeared into pitch black, no discernible jacket or shirt, just a void. My mind flagged the absurdity. You can't have a person without a body, and yet that's exactly what I was seeing. A presence without substance. Every instinct screamed run. Climb back through the hatch, race up the stairs, burst into the hallway and scream for help. But my legs felt rooted. Then the flashlight flicked back on in my hand. Somehow. I hadn't hit the switch. Weak beam illuminating dust in fragile waves. The figure's outline sharpened. Slender. Human. Height, shoulders squared. It raised one hand. Even in the low light, I could see the fingers were too long, too slender to be human. It pointed at the console. My heartbeat pounded in my throat. I realized the console screen still glowed, the blinking, "Activate before dawn" message taunting me. The generator's hum had simplified, reduced to a single monotone beat that reverberated through the soles of my boots. The figure's finger pointed insistently at the console, then slowly swept across the readouts. Coordinates I couldn't parse. Countdown timers, schematic drawings of pipes running into the earth beneath Fort Havelock. With a sudden surge of adrenaline, I flicked my beam toward the figure's waist. There was no belt, no equipment, nothing to suggest weight. It was like someone carved a silhouette from darkness and stood it upright. All I could feel was that presence. My training kicked in. I snapped off the flashlight again, keeping the glow from the console as my only guide. I backed toward the hatch and dropped to one knee, aiming my pistol at the feet of the apparition. A bead of sweat dripped off my temple. I whispered, "If you want something, say something." The figure tilted its head as though listening for my words, then stepped forward. Each movement emphasized its impossible form, like someone pressing a black velvet cloth into life. The floorboards didn't creak. Nothing gave under its weight. It reached the hatch and knelt, placing its hands on the edge, but there was no hatch there any longer. The wood had vanished, swallowed by darkness. I caught my breath and raised the gun higher, finger trembling on the trigger. "Don't," I told it. But the figure's head angled back toward the generator. Eyes, if you could call the glowing emptiness eyes, fixed on the torch handle, the gloves draped across it. Something in that motion clicked in my mind. Power source, controls, a mechanism. This was no random trespasser scavenging parts. Someone, or something, was running an operation here, and I'd stumbled into it. The generator's hum deepened, vibrating through my bones, and I realized the figure had turned off the torch. The room plunged almost entirely dark as any place on Earth, and all I could see was the glow behind me. It flickered, my pulse thundered in my wrists. Time slowed. Then, in the silence, the static voice crackled over my radio earbud. Distant, distorted. "Contamination. Stand by. Protocol." I yanked the radio from my vest. Control panel blinked locked, as if it read my panic. Something hammered in my chest. They knew I was here. Dispatch had gone from uneasy to active lockdown. No backup was coming now, only orders to fall back. I took a shallow breath, forcing myself to think. I needed evidence, names, files, logs, something to prove this wasn't just a haunted old base. I scanned the barrels again, glimpsed one marked physical sample, human tissue, next to a shelf of sealed vials. Footsteps sounded above, metallic clinks like someone walking in heavy boots, far weightier than the slender figures. I swung around. Lights overhead flickered, revealing the hatch closing behind me, latch clicking. I squeezed off 2 warning shots upward through the opening. Concrete dust rained down. "Get out of there," I shouted, voice echoing. No response. The figure drifted back toward the console, hands emerging to slide across the glass panel. The screens changed. A map of the compound lit up, red dots spreading like a rash. Sector A, B, C, every bunk room lit. Then the dots extended beyond the fence line, marking roads, perimeters, my cruiser's location. My chest tightened. They were monitoring me. The figure looked at the map display, then at the glove-clad torch beside it. It lifted the torch and pointed it at the console as if to sever the power. My head snapped left. Another hatch for a backup generator room gaped open across the chamber. Light spilled from it, blue-white this time. The figure nearly dissolved into the darkness toward that light, leaving only its boots and a ripple in the air. I realized then that I had a choice. Climb through the exit hatch behind it, or stay and gather proof. The hatch behind glowed eerily, the cooler lights from another chamber calling to me. If I followed, I might see who, or what, was controlling this place. But backup might arrive and find nothing but empty rooms. If I ran now, I'd lose everything. My gun hand ached. Time ran out. The generator's hum slowed to a crawl, its throb becoming a question. I took a final breath, voice low. "I'm coming through," and stepped into the blue glow. I paused at the lip of the hatch, the chill of the blue-white light washing over my sleeve as I dropped into the next chamber. The air here was cold, biting, mouthfuls of stale breath that tasted like burned plastic and antiseptic. I hit the floor on my side, knuckles scraping concrete, and rolled to a crouch. Above me, the hatch sealed with a pneumatic hiss, leaving me in near darkness. Only that pale glow from the room ahead guiding me forward. I crept along a narrow corridor, walls lined with rows of metal cabinets, each numbered and stamped with warnings. Biohazard, restricted, property of Dode. My boots clicked softly on grated flooring, the echo of each step sounding far too loud. The hum of the generator had followed me through the hatch, a steady pulse that seemed to anchor my nerves. I checked the time on my wrist. 2:47 a.m. Dawn was hours away, and already I was deeper than I'd ever wanted. At the corridor's end, a thick glass door stood ajar, a red emergency light blinking above it. Through the glass I saw a long laboratory bench, overhead lights casting sterile white pools of illumination. Instruments I didn't recognize, centrifuges, spectrometers, rows of test tubes lined the counters. In the center of the room, under a sealed biocontainer, lay a form wrapped in a heavy canvas tarp, secured with bright orange straps. The hum here was faint, but I could feel it in my bones, reverberating against the shielded walls. I eased the door open and slipped inside. The floor was sticky, coated with a sheen that clung to my boots. My flashlight beam split the tarp's edge, revealing the outline of something humanoid, shoulders, a head, feet bound at the ankles. I forced myself closer, heart thundering. Underneath, the shape was rigid, too symmetrical to be random. My pulse stuttered. I dropped to one knee and brushed the tarp aside. Underneath lay a body, female, mid-20s, uniformed in a faded tactical vest marked Private Security, name tag removed. Her face was pale, eyes closed, lips cracked. No signs of torture, no blood, but around her throat a thin line of bruising suggested strangulation. A small patch on her vest bore an emblem I didn't recognize, a stylized raven encircled by a gear. The canvas smelled of sweat and something sweet, like fermenting fruit. My glove-covered fingertips trembled as I traced the outline of a bruised wrist peeking from beneath the jacket. I swallowed hard and straightened, scanning the room for clues. At the bench behind me, stacks of labeled folders lay half open. I flicked one toward me. Subject, 47A. Status, classified. Origin, Site 47. My hands shook as I rifled through papers, scribbled notes on test results, charts of blood samples, references to psychophysiological response, and neurochemical mapping. I remembered the binder I'd seen in the office labeled Project Eclipse. Something was being tested here. People like her. A low grinding noise made me freeze. The overhead lights dimmed, then flared brighter. My radio static hissed, faint voices whispering fragments. Containment breach. Protocol 3, purge on authorization. I dropped the dossier and scanned the lab. The biocontainer holding her slid open on its own, hydraulic hinges whining. The lid raised, revealing rows of empty slots, vials missing, specimens removed. Whoever had been here had taken the samples but left the bodies. Footsteps sounded just outside the door, heavy, purposeful. I backed toward the bench, raspy breath visible in the cold air. My mind raced. I needed evidence, but I needed to get out alive. I grabbed one of the folders and stuffed it into my pocket, then swept the beam along the walls for another exit. Behind me, the glass door slid shut with a hiss, sealing me inside. I clicked my pistol safety off and advanced toward the locked door. My radio crackled again. Officer, evacuate. Immediately. High contamination. Risk. Repeat. The voice sounded close, urgent. I banged on the door with the butt of my flashlight. Let me out. No response. The light above the door shifted from red to amber, then back to red. Behind the glass I saw movement. A figure in a lab coat, face hidden behind a surgical mask, stepping among the counters, retrieving a metal box from a storage shelf. The figure paused, head tilting as if sensing me. I swallowed and aimed, heart pounding so hard I thought the barrel would shake. No shot went off. The figure vanished behind a rack of equipment. The lights flickered, and when they steadied, the door was open. I hesitated, part of me expecting a trap, part knowing I had no choice. I slipped out into the corridor, gun raised, flashlight in my free hand. The silent figure in the lab coat stood at the far end, holding the metal box. It turned, and in the briefest flash of reflection, I saw the man's face. Dr. Marcus Lang, the Department of Defense physician reported missing 5 years earlier. His eyes, sunken, hollow, locked with mine for a heartbeat before he dropped behind another cabinet. I followed, adrenaline fueling my legs. The corridor branched into 2 tunnels, one ascending, one descending. The metal box hummed faintly, so I chose the descending path, reasoning that deeper might lead to an exit or communications hub. The steps spiraled, trembled under my boots. I shouldered the metal box as I crossed, ducking under hanging conduit until I reached a control booth. Inside, I slammed the box onto the console desk and hit the largest button. An emergency shutdown. The generator's roar eased, dying to a dull throb. Lights flickered off in sequence, red, amber, green, until only the booth had power. Screens blinked. System failure. Override required. I whipped the top of the box open and found a USB drive taped inside, scrawled 47A data dump. I shoved it into a slot on the console. Files loaded. Video feeds, logs, audio recordings. I watched in horror as the camera on Vault 7 recorded my arrival. Then cut to Agent 47A, strapped to the bench, monitors showing neurochemical responses as toxins were injected. I saw her eyes dilate, body convulse, then lay still as data streamed across screens. I swallowed bile as I realized it had all been recorded. Proof of the murder. Proof of the experiments. The booth door clanged open. Lang's boots echoed on the catwalk. I spun, pistol drawn, drive in hand. He stood at the hatch's entrance, face contorted with rage and something unreadable. He raised a hand, but it wasn't human. Pulses of dark energy flickered around his fingers, as though the neurotoxin had transformed him. The generator's shutdown had triggered his final stage. I descended the ladder into a sprawling maintenance bay built into the earth itself. A cathedral of rusted I-beams and catwalks draped in shadows. The emergency lights overhead flickered erratically, casting jagged patterns across the walls that made the entire chamber feel alive, pulsing with breath. My chest ached with every step as I crossed the grated floor toward the far wall, where a series of heavy doors marked Authorized Personnel Only lined the concrete. Each door bore a small observation window smeared with grime. One door stood ajar, door 4. A dim green light glowed within, and the hum of equipment was louder here, resonating like a heartbeat. I radioed dispatch on a chance it was still functional. Unit 12, I'm in. Status report? Static. The echo answered back. I clipped the metal box to my belt and approached the threshold, senses electric. Inside was a long lab corridor, walls slick with condensation, floor strewn with cable remnants and discarded test vials. The scent of ozone and scorched metal clawed at my lungs. My flashlight swept across faded hazard signs warning of bio-neuroagents and do not breathe. My boots clanged against metal grate as I stepped forward, every nerve screaming to turn back. But I drew in a steadying breath, tension spooling in my chest, and kept moving, pistol raised. About halfway down, I saw him. Doctor Marcus Lang, standing beneath a flickering fluorescent fixture, coat torn and stained. His face, half lit, revealed a smile too wide, wet with anticipation. In his hand, he held a vial slim enough to slip between cracked fingers, red fluid glowing faintly, as if lit from within. I ducked behind a cable reel, heart thunderous. He hadn't noticed me. I edged forward, careful not to disturb the litter of broken glass and papers. A sheaf of documents lay scattered on a lab trolley. Subject 47B, interim report. Neuroreactive agent. Protocol 3 initiated. I grabbed a handful, stuffing them into my pocket as I sidestepped around a coil of exposed wiring. The corridor ended at a reinforced steel door labeled Control Room. Above, a keypad blinked red. Access denied. Lang advanced slowly, steps echoing. He licked his lips, pale fluid gleaming. I raised the pistol. Step away. My voice cracked. He tilted his head and laughed. A dry, echoing sound that ricocheted down the corridor. Then he hurled the vial into the air. It shattered against the grated ceiling, silver droplets arcing before streaking down. The air filled with a metallic tang, and I felt it first on my skin. A prickling, buzzing sensation like insects crawling beneath my gloves. My vision blurred. I stumbled back, firing 2 rounds at the door's keypad. Sparks flew as the bullets tore into circuits. The door's lights blinked off, then on, green. It slid open with a shriek revealing the control room's interior. Walls covered in monitors showing every camera angle I'd passed. Sector C's lights danced in patterns. Vault 7, the generator bay, the lab with Agent 47A's body, each feed marked live. Lang seized the moment and lunged forward, arms outstretched. I swung the pistol and slammed the butt into his shoulder, knocking him off balance. He howled, and the grin on his face widened into something bestial. I backed into the control room and slammed the door shut, jamming my boot under the frame. Monitors flickered, controls glowed under my flashlight. Alarms from the corridor spilled through the sealed door, klaxons of final lockdown. I slammed a hand to the largest console, screens morphing to a hatch control interface. I punched emergency override. The screen prompted, enter override code. I dredged up the numbers from the earlier schematics. 4319. The screen hissed, gates unfurling on a 10-second countdown. I glanced at the monitors. Lang's reflection flickered in the hallway feed, advancing on the door. 1098. I hit confirm and heard hydraulic pistons roar. A panel slid aside beside me, revealing a narrow vent shaft just large enough. I ripped off the grill plates and peered inside. Darkness and ductwork. Below, the corridor lights glowed faintly as Lang reached the door, hammering it with gloved fists. His form was warped, slightly elongated, his eyes reflecting the red of the monitors. He didn't speak, only eyes of hungry intent. 765. I cut open the metal casing with my knife, pried my fingers through. The slot led down into the grating. I dropped the box of evidence beside the console, rifle slung over my back, pistols still in my hand. At 4 seconds, I swung my leg into the vent, kicking off with all my weight. 3-2-1. The floor beneath the control room's monitors dropped away in a roar of hydraulics, revealing a spiral drain well that claimed the entire room. Screens, consoles, and the evidence box tumbled in. The steel doors slid shut, sealing the chamber I'd just left and trapping the proof inside. I hung from the vent's lip, my chest burning, fingers raw. Below, I heard the generator bays roar and a distant crash as steel and glass smashed. I stared down as the control room imploded into darkness. My mind reeled. That evidence, Agent 47A's video, test logs, neurotoxin data, was gone. Langa's figure appeared behind me in the vent's reflection on a shattered monitor shard, his grin impossibly wide. He reached for me, fingers gliding over the metal edge, and hissed through the slits of his mask, words warped by static. Containment secured, protocol complete. I hauled myself forward into the shaft, dragging my boots through slick grime as I crawled into silence. My radio crackled one last time, a voice distorted. Unit 12, do you copy? I swallowed, voice trembling. Copy. Extraction. Sector clear. No response. The shaft ended at a grated door leading to the outside drainage culvert. I forced it open, stepping into the cold night air, damp grass beneath my boots, clear starlight overhead. I tasted freedom on the wind, but also ash and regret. The hatch in the ground closed with a soft click behind me. I stood in the marsh, chest heaving, uniform stained, stripped of certainty. The control room had vanished, my only proof swallowed by hydraulic steel. But deep in my pocket, one folder remained untouched. The original Project Eclipse binder's single page I'd rescued. It contained only schematics of the generator wiring and a notation. Location, Fort Havelock sub-basement control node. No footage, no test logs, no vials, just a map and a single line. Subject 47B, failed containment. I radioed in my coordinates. Dispatch asked my status. I said, I'm okay, but I'm not done. I pressed my back against the damp embankment beside the culvert exit, waiting for my heartbeat to slow. The marsh grass whispered around me in the pre-dawn chill. Every sound felt amplified, the distant crow of a rooster somewhere to the east, the low drone of insects still active in the night's final hour. My uniform, coated in grime and slick with oily residue from the sub-basement, clung uncomfortably to my skin. I checked the binder in my pocket, the single schematic page from Project Eclipse, edge frayed, ink smudged from moisture. It was my only physical proof that anything had happened here. Dispatch's silence on the radio unsettled me more than the looming morning light. I tapped the mic again. Unit 12 to dispatch. Extraction ETA. I need confirmation. Static, then a faint click. Unit 12, copy. Extraction team en route. ETA 30 minutes. Relief and dread washed over me. 30 minutes in these fields meant sunrise. If Lang, or whatever he'd become, pursued me across open ground, I had no cover out here. I hauled myself upright and surveyed the horizon. The compound's chain-link fence was visible about 200 yards away, rising like a thin line against the dim sky. Beyond it, gravel service roads crisscrossed the grass toward the gate where I'd entered. I tightened the binder under my arm and started running. Boots heavy in the wet soil, gun still drawn should I encounter any figure or flicker of movement. Halfway across the marsh, I kicked a mound of earth and nearly pitched forward. My lungs burned. The cold air felt like shards in my throat. The generator's silent hum had been replaced by a ringing in my ears. Each thump of my heart jolted me toward the fence. I glimpsed shapes flickering through the fence's chain. Figures moving beneath the still-lit floodlamps of the compound's outer perimeter. Shadows long and strange, too uniform to be wildlife. I slowed for a second, chest heaving, eyes squinting against the dying darkness. One shape strode along the fence line, boots clacking on gravel, silhouette too tall, too rigid. It paused at a corner post and turned as if sensing me. My pulse spiked. I ducked behind a low rise of grass. The figure remained still, facing north, shoulders squared. For a moment I thought it human, then realized the outline was wrong. Jagged, uneven, flickering as if static surrounded it. I risked a glance. No visible face, just darkness where any features should be. It lifted an arm, thin, elongated, and pointed toward me. A mechanical whir rose from the compound's floodlight mechanism as lamps swiveled to illuminate the marsh in scarlet glow. The fence post's shadow lengthened into the field, stretching toward me like a hand. My gut seized. I turned and ran again, boots churning marsh and clutching at the grass. The binder slipped, flipping open. The schematic scattered pages across the wet ground. I dove after them, snatching the lone sheet back with trembling fingers. A bleat of alarm echoed from behind me. The floodlights had locked onto my position. The fence's perimeter camera lights clicked on, rotating to track my movement. I scrambled to my feet, heart in my throat, and plunged through the fence's sharp gap. Barbed wire rasped against my uniform. I felt tiny cuts on my forearms. The gravel road felt solid beneath my boots. I paused to catch my breath only long enough to realize the shadow figure hadn't crossed the fence. It stood just inside, haloed by red light, watching me. Then it vanished. Ahead, I could see the open gate where I'd entered, beyond it, the dark outline of my cruiser. I sprinted toward it, arms pumping, the binder pressed to my chest. Gravel sprayed behind me as tires roared. I reached the gate and shoved it open, stumbling onto the road. My Ford Explorer idled where I'd left it, doors unlocked, protocol abandoned in my rush to investigate. I tumbled inside, slammed the door, and jammed the schematics into the passenger seat before firing the engine. Headlights cut through the red glow of the floodlamps as I backed through the gate. In the rearview mirror, I saw the barrier doors slide closed. First the outer gate, then several sections of fencing falling into place like shutters on a window. The compound sealed itself by protocol, and no matter what proof I carried, someone intended to lock this place away forever. I navigated the gravel back to pavement and activated my overhead light, though no one was there to see it. The radio crackled life for a moment. Unit 12 report. I pressed the PTT button. I'm clear, heading to rendezvous. The voice responded after a pause. Copy that. ETA 15. I clicked off and shifted gears, the engine's growl echoing my heartbeat. As I rounded a bend, headlights appeared behind me. Two vehicles, blackened SUVs with bulletproof grills. They flanked me. Lights off except for dim running lamps. I slowed, heart hammering, hands tight on the wheel. One SUV pulled ahead and braked at a distance. The other pulled up alongside. No doors opened, no figures emerged. I watched through the passenger's window as the driver's seat remained empty, dashboard lit by faint instrument glow. My mind raced. Was this the extraction team dispatch had promised, or something else? I flicked on my dome light and reached slowly for the binder. The page inside showed the schematic at the top and, scrawled in thick ink at the bottom, 3 words. Subject 47B. Active. Suddenly, the SUV's front windows went black, tinted shields sliding down instantly, and a low lamp flicked on inside the driverless cab. I saw the Raven Gear emblem etched on a vest lying on the passenger seat of the lead SUV. The figure in my memory, Agent 47A's emblem. A flash of movement. The hatch on the roof of the lead SUV opened, and a black-gloved hand extended, holding a remote. The wire antenna spun slowly as if receiving a signal. The vehicle behind me locked its doors with a solid click. My pulse froze. I jammed the Explorer into drive and veered off the road, tires squealing as I fishtailed into the grassy shoulder. The SUVs followed, mats of metal wheels shredding grass as they gave chase without lights. My own headlights off, I steered by moonlight and distant, floodlit haze behind me. Behind me, I heard a blast of compressed air as the lead SUV deployed a barrier, a metal spike strip, across the road. Tires went flat in a scream of rubber against metal. I swerved to avoid it, but the strip caught the rear tire, shredding it. The Explorer fishtailed off the pavement, crunching across gravel and into a ditch. I jerked the wheel, regained control, and lurched upward onto the road again, Explorer listing. Adrenaline fueled me as I realized my only chance was to lose them in the next turn. The road curved tightly left ahead, bordered by dense pines. I floored it and veered into the curve before headlights could adjust. The SUVs followed blindly, engines revving, and disappeared from sight in the trees. I coasted to a stop, heart pounding so hard I thought the chassis would shudder. I killed the engine and blacked out the dome light. Silence swallowed the cabin. Through the windshield, the road stretched empty and dark. No SUVs, no chase, just the night and the rattling of my breath. I sat for a long moment, hands trembling on the wheel, the binder open on the seat beside me. The schematic glowed faintly in the dashlights, its edges curled. Below the map, the words danced. Active. I reached for my radio. Silence. I turned it on and off. Nothing. I realized then that dispatch's reassurances meant nothing. I was alone, stranded on a back road, knowing that someone, or something, had control of the compound and its secrets. I slid out of the Explorer, binder in hand, and closed the door quietly. The forest air hit me, cold, sharp, smelling of pine and damp earth. My uniform felt heavy, soaked with oil and sweat, my gun weightless and useless against what's coming. I tucked the binder under my arm and stepped off the road into the trees, boots sinking into the loam. Every instinct screamed to run back to a safe zone, but I knew safe zones didn't exist anymore. Only the hunt. As I vanished into the undergrowth, headlights flickered at the road's edge, searching. But the night swallowed me whole. In my jacket pocket, the schematic pressed against my ribs, a silent reminder. Site 47 wasn't abandoned, it was alive. And so was I, burdened with knowing that Fort Havelock's forbidden heart still beat beneath the earth, calling out for its next chapter. I kept moving. The forest grew denser, shadows thicker. The last thing I heard was the distant rustle of a branch snapping, too deliberate to be wildlife. I froze, scanned the darkness, heart pounding. The silence answered. I exhaled, chest heaving, and slipped deeper into the pines, carrying nothing but a single sheet of paper against the cold. I moved through the pine thicket with deliberate quiet, each footfall measured against the soft earth. The schematic's corner dug into my side as I slipped my hand inside my jacket to keep it close. Dawn had not yet broken, but the sky was no longer black, an inky slate that shifted toward bruised purple. Every rustle around me sounded like pursuit, every snap of twig like a warning. My lungs burned as I pressed deeper into the woods, winding between trees spaced too evenly to be natural. The binder felt hot against my ribs, as if the paper itself burned with secrets. I paused beside a fallen log, chest heaving. In the distance, the gravel road curved through a gap in the trees, the way back to civilization, or what remained of it. I stared at that open corridor, mind torn between flight and the compulsion to expose the truth. I unzipped my jacket and pulled out the schematic. The words, Subject 47, Be Active, glowed in the dim light of my flashlight. Below that, someone had scrawled another note in hasty black ink. Phase 4, Initiate Recall. My heart thundered. Too many phases had already been completed. Too many lives sacrificed under Fort Havelock's buried halls. But recall? That meant withdrawing something, bringing it back, or calling someone back. A breeze stirred the pines, carrying an acrid scent of smoke. My head snapped up as a column of thin gray smoke curled above the treetops from somewhere east of the compound. I stood, pressing my back against the log, weighing my options. If I ran back to the road, I might flag down passing traffic or encounter the waiting SUVs. If I circled around toward the smoke, I might find survivors, or more victims. I pocketed the schematic and crept forward, choosing the path toward the smoke. Under a canopy of ancient pines, dew clung to needles, dripping onto the forest floor. I followed what looked like a narrow trail, crushed underfoot by heavy boots. I recognized military-issue tread, deep cleats, unfamiliar pattern. Whoever had been here moved south. away from the marsh and the electrical core. The trail led me to an old service road, cracked asphalt overgrown with grass. Halfway down, I saw the charred remains of my evidence box's lid, twisted around the edge of a roadside culvert. Blackened fragments lay scattered among pine needles. My hands went cold. Someone had retrieved it, then discarded it. I knelt, gathering the splinters, heart sinking. Without that box's contents, Agent 47A's data dump, I had only a single schematic and shredded notes. But I clung to it. Beyond the culvert, the smoke eddied upward from a collapsed guard shack. The shack's roof had fallen in, charred beams splintering outward. Inside, smoldering embers glowed like dying eyes. I swept the beam across the interior. A uniformed figure slumped over the remains of a desk, his gas mask visor cracked and caked in soot. I approached slowly, pistol out, every cell screaming for caution. Reaching the desk, I saw papers pinned under a heavy rock. Design documents for what looked like a mobile generator array, stamped with the same Raven Gear emblem. I pried the rock free and flipped through the pages. Schematic overlays matching the one I'd rescued, but annotated with GPS coordinates leading to a site 20 miles southwest. Another off-limit zone. A calendar page fell out, red-circled, date 2 days ahead. Operation Recall. A groan behind me made me spin. The man in the corner shivered, then sat up with a start. His uniform patch read, DOD Field Unit. He wiped soot from his mouth, graying stubble catching the light. His eyes were wide with disbelief. "You survived," he rasped. I lowered my pistol. "How many are left?" I asked, voice raw. He stared at the calendar page, voice trembling. "Phase 4 begins in 48 hours. They're calling back all active subjects, including you." My blood ran cold. "Subjects?" I swallowed. "I'm not." He coughed, shaking his head. "Nobody is safe. They've perfected the agent. It's not just neurotoxic, it's Seraphim-based. Integrates with memory centers, reprograms them. Subjects aren't just test beds anymore, they're field operatives." My mind reeled. The woman in the lab, Agent 47A, was only the beginning. Phase 4 meant deployment. The figures I'd seen, those impossible silhouettes, they were not ghosts but active agents, engineered from those test subjects. Above us, the sky lightened to ash gray. I closed the distance and ripped the calendar from the papers. The date was 2 days hence. My hands shook as I folded it. "If they deploy in 2 days," I whispered, "we have to warn someone." He coughed again, blood spattering on the desk's metal edge. "Dispatch, they're compromised." He tapped the schematic on the desk. "This is the only way to prove it. But by the time you get it where it needs to go, they'll be waiting." I crumpled the notes in my fist, heart hammering. The smoke from the guard shack curled upward, a silent requiem. The forest seemed to hold its breath. In that moment, I realized how small I was. One veteran trooper carrying a torn schematic against an operation that spanned decades, stretched across states unknown. I stood, voice firm. "Then we go to those coordinates. We stop Phase 4. He looked at me, eyes dimming. "If you go, you won't come back." I didn't answer. I pocketed the calendar and schematic, shouldered the charred rock, and strode toward the service road. Behind me, the guard shack smoldered in silence, a tomb for the last witness. The wind shifted, carrying the promise of rain and the stench of secrecy. I walked out of the trees, boots splashing through puddles, toward a world about to change. And I carried with me the last proof of Fort Havelock's forbidden truths, bound in ink and fire, ticking down to a reckoning no one could ignore. The rain began as a whisper on the pine needles. a soft patter that grew into a steady drum against the forest canopy as I emerged onto the cracked service road. The air was colder now, sharpened by the coming storm. I tightened the collar of my jacket and glanced back at the dark tree line, where the guard shack smoldered its last embers. A low rumble of thunder answered, as though the sky itself was warning me to turn back. I checked my watch, 5:18 a.m. Dawn would break within the hour. 2 days remained before Phase 4. I stuffed the folded calendar and the schematic into my cargo pants. Proof of everything I'd uncovered: the active test subjects, the neurochemical experiments, the deployment plan. Without external evidence, this lone page of Project Eclipse would have to suffice. My Ford Explorer was parked 50 yards down the road, tires half submerged in a muddy ditch. I jogged toward it, boots sloshing through puddles. In the rearview mirror, vague shapes moved beneath the tree line. Agent silhouettes waiting, or perhaps hunting. I hurried, shaking off the sensation that unseen eyes tracked my every step. Inside the Explorer, I left the engine running low and toggled the dome light to full. I spread the schematic on the passenger seat and tapped the screen of my city-issued phone, dialing dispatch. After 3 rings, Lieutenant Foster answered groggily. "This is Unit 12, I said, voice tight. "I have actionable intel on unauthorized human experimentation at Fort Havelock." "Jesus Christ," Foster muttered. "You're alive? We lost contact hours ago. Extraction team never showed." I ran a hand through my hair. "I've got 1 page of Project Eclipse data, deployment scheduled for 2 days. Phase 4, operatives fielded, neurochemical weapon integrated." Silence. Then, "Fort Havelock is sealed off. Government jurisdiction. We can't just waltz in there. There are civilians scheduled on that flight path, charter planes, medevac helicopters. They'll be exposed." I leaned closer to the phone. "You need to call Chief Hargraves, mobilize a federal task force. Section 702 clearance, now." "Unit 12, you sound," he began. "I'm the goddamn evidence," I barked. "Or I'll go public. Local press, journalists, I'll burn this place down." He sighed. "On it. Stay put and stay safe." He hung up. I exhaled hard and studied the schematic. Project Eclipse. The neural interface harnessed barometric charge generators to amplify chemical dispersal across a test sector. Fort Havelock's forbidden grounds were never about old Cold War research. They'd become the launch pad for a living weapon. The agents I'd glimpsed weren't ghosts, they were soldiers. I yanked the Explorer into gear, tires spinning off the muddy verge, and headed for the county line. The road curved through farmland. Cornstalks bowed under the rain. My headlight beam caught a figure in the field. Tall, dark, half-turned, watching. I swerved, brakes squealing, and the figure vanished into the corn. My pulse hammered as I barreled on toward the highway. At the state line, I flagged down a trooper's cruiser heading the opposite direction. The trooper, patrol stripes on his sleeve, rolled down his window. He'd seen my badge from the running lights. I nodded. "You need backup?" I passed him the schematic. His eyes widened, brows lifting. "Feds already en route?" he asked. I nodded again. He jumped in behind me as I peeled back onto the highway, siren and lights off, urgency our only beacon. We made contact with State Police HQ at 5:42 a.m. The dispatcher relayed the FBI had activated a no-fly zone over the region. Local law enforcement on standby. Mayor's office notified under classified protocol. Phase 4. Weasel words echoed in my mind. 2 days until deployment. 2 days before the first neuroagent operatives hit civilian territory. I drove through acres of farmland. Black skies overhead. Farmhouses shuddered against the storm. The trooper rode shotgun, radio crackling with vague chatter. At 6:05 a.m., we turned off onto a service road leading to a small regional airport where the charter flights were scheduled. Planes sat on runways, their engines dark. A Cessna in the rain looked like a cage waiting to open. We pulled up to the terminal. A cluster of federal agents in rain gear waited under the overhang, FBI insignias and hazmat markings. They formed a tight semicircle. Agent Ramirez stepped forward. Unit 12, we briefed the Secretary of Homeland Security. We have 48 hours to neutralize any threats. Your intel will get us in. I handed over the schematic and calendar. Phase 4. Everyone listed as 47B or similar is active. We need to raid the secondary site. Coordinates on that page, before anyone is deployed. Ramirez studied the schematic. Command is authorizing entry under emergency provisions. We mobilize tonight. He nodded to 2 hazmat trucks rolling up. Suit up. We leave in 2 hours. I stepped back under the rain and watched the storm clouds race across the tarmac. The rain was heavier now, pooling under my boots. Time narrowed to the ticking of a cryptic calendar. Tomorrow was too late. The day after, worse. I closed my eyes against the downpour, voice low. Make it count. Ramirez placed a hand on my shoulder. We will. Lightning cracked overhead, illuminating the runways and the distant silhouette of Fort Havelock through the storm. Then darkness reclaimed the sky. I turned toward the hazmat trucks, heart stuffed with dread and determination. The storm was here. So was I, one tarnished trooper buried in bureaucracy and secrets. But at dawn tonight, we would breach that compound again, this time with federal authority, and face whatever had been unleashed. And somewhere deep in the old bunkers, the hum of hidden generators would tremble as Phase 4 drew nearer, counting down to an operation that could not fail. The black SUVs rolled in low behind the hazmat trucks, their engines rumbling like distant thunder as we ascended the access road toward the secondary site coordinates. Rain slashed against the windshields. Wipers fought in frantic arcs to clear the glass. My hands shook on the steering wheel, more from anticipation than cold. As I recited the partial schematic in my head, every line burned into memory. Generator bays, sub-basement control nodes, that hidden hatch we'd breached once before. 2 days stood between us and Phase 4. Tonight, we had to stop it. Agent Ramirez climbed into the lead hazmat truck and barked into his radio. Alpha Team, prepare for insertion. Bravo, stand by to secure the perimeter. Unit 12, you're with me. Keep that schematic close, no digital copies. He turned and met my eyes through the rain-streaked glass. You ready, trooper? I nodded, swallowing hard. Inside the cab's dim green glow, we donned airborne level B suits. Heavy, claustrophobic nylon that sealed our bodies in plastic. Exhalations fogged the tiny face visor until I saw only my own wide eyes reflected back. I checked my pistol, still loaded with the hollow points. And no movement detected. Relief was brief. One console flickered red, indicating an override attempt. The briefing files flashed on another screen. Remote reactivation, unauthorized. My heart sank. Someone else was fighting this shutdown, from outside the compound or inside. The schematic in my pocket felt heavy. Without warning, the entire room went dark. Emergency red lights that barely pierced the gloom. The generator hum behind the sealed door resumed, low and steady. They've got a backup power source, Ramirez growled. Full lockout failing. The trooper beside me hissed, "We need to jam the remote signal. Communications uplink must be blocked." He sprinted to a console in the corner marked Comms Matrix. Wires rattled as he yanked connectors free. Screens died one by one. The dispersal chamber feed faded to static. Then a single monitor remained illuminated. The hallway cam feeding the tunnel outside door 9. On it, I saw a silhouette moving toward us. Tall, slender, gloved hands, glinting with unknown intent. The same impossible figure we'd seen at Fort Havelock. It paused on the comm, head tilting as if recognizing us, then stepped forward. Ramirez turned to me. "We've got maybe 30 seconds before they reboot from a secondary uplink. We finish override now, or we fail." He hit a series of keys, but the confirm prompt flickered off. No response. The screen changed to authorization required, level 5. His face hardened. "They locked us out. We need local manual control." He turned to the sealed door labeled manual override. It had a keyhole and a circular valve handle. The trooper produced a skeleton key from his belt, acquired for tonight's mission. He slid it in and turned. Ramirez grabbed the valve and spun as sparks flew from the mechanism. A pneumatic hiss filled the room as bolts shot back. The sealed door groaned open to reveal the corridor, bathed in the generator's orange pulse. The silhouette had paused just beyond the threshold. With no time for stealth, I leveled my pistol. "Stop!" I yelled. The figure took a single deliberate step inside. Gravel crunched under its boots, too clean for any maintenance worker. No mud, no dust. Its face remained hidden in shadow. Behind it, I glimpsed another presence. Dr. Lang. Half human, half amorphous, skin slick with condensation. He raised a hand as though greeting old friends. A thin blue glow pulsed from his fingertips. The trooper swung a rifle butt at the figure's legs, but the blow passed through nothing but air. The silhouette remained unmoved. Ramirez cried out and fired a round into the chest. No flash. The bullet clanged off an unseen barrier. Time slowed as the figure turned its head toward us. The generator's hum crescendoed in the corridor, then died. Silence filled the broadcast room. I realized the dispersal chamber's timer had reset, back to 2 a.m., counting down faster than before. Ramirez grabbed my arm. "We have to move, now!" He yanked me toward a side door marked Access Tunnel. We sprinted past the inert silhouette and dove through just as the sealed door slammed shut behind us. The vault door's hydraulics engaged, metal shearing across steel. We slammed the tunnel door at our backs, then raced down a flight of stairs into the cold sub-basement. The emergency lights blinked out as we descended, leaving only our helmet lamps. My breath came fast. I could taste adrenaline. Each step took us farther from the breach room, deeper into the earth. But the dispersal chamber's cold timer still ran above my head through every monitor and every echo. We reached the original hatch ladder. Ramirez paused at the rungs, pressing a gloved hand to the concrete wall. He exhaled slowly. "We bought some time, but not enough. That silhouette, it's not human. It's the project made real." He looked at me, visor misting. "Even if we abort Phase 4 here, they'll adapt. We need to hit them at the source." I nodded, heart pounding. The hatch above was sealed by protocol, would open only from the compound side or by override code. Ramirez produced a data link from his belt and attached it to a socket at the ladder's base. A green light flickered. "Override detonation sequence," he said. "We collapse this tunnel in 60 seconds. It'll buy us hours, maybe days." I lifted the schematic one last time. "We leak the rest of this. Every media outlet, every journalist, they'll come down on them." He slapped my shoulder. "Get out of here alive. We meet at Rendezvous Point Charlie." I climbed the ladder 2 rungs at a time as the timer on his device ticked down. The hatch above cracked open. Rain splattered in as brute metal claws withdrew bolts. I crawled through, slamming it shut behind me and yanking the chain to clamp it tight. A muffled roar shook the ground. Behind me, The sub-basement collapsed in a thunder of concrete and metal. I didn't look back. I raced for the fence line, heart pounding, as the compound's generators groaned in protest. Above the storm-dark sky, a single floodlight flickered and died. The rain washed mud down my boots as I stumbled into the trees. I kept running until the forest swallowed me whole, my boots slipping in the mud each time I changed pace. The night wind shredded at my suit's sealed seams, cold water running down the back of my neck. Behind me, the shuttered entrances of Site 47 lay hidden by darkness and the storm, generators now silent. Or perhaps they were merely waiting for the next order. My lungs burned with each breath, and my mind spun with every fragment of evidence I carried. The torn schematic, the scrawled calendar, the bruised dossier on Agent 47A, now tucked deep in my jacket. I reached the black SUVs parked half off the asphalt, doors gaping like emptied shells. The trooper who'd followed me climbed out, face ashen, and handed me a radio handset. Only static answered. We glanced at each other, gloves dripping, and without a word, I dropped to one knee and rummaged in my cargo pocket for the single sheet of paper I'd rescued from the guard shack's charred rubble. It was damp, corners curling, but the ink was legible. Coordinates, phase timings, and at the bottom, a third notation in unfamiliar handwriting. Recall imminent, neutralize subject. My mind roiled. We'd paused Phase 4. We'd collapsed the sub-basement and severed the communications node. We'd driven back the agents and Dr. Lang's twisted creations. Yet here, beneath the sickly red glow of the SUV's taillights, I realized those successes had only bought time, not ended the threat. "They can recreate the generators," I said in a hoarse whisper, voice swallowed by the wind. "They'll just start again at another compound, with another Phase 0. The trooper watched the sky, dark even through the thin gray clouds. "And the subjects," he murmured. "They're in the wild now. Somewhere out there, 47B and its siblings are active." His words were a verdict. The innocents afflicted, turned into weapons for a secret war. My hands trembled as I closed my fingers around the paper. The rain spattered across its surface, smearing the edges of the ink, but the warning remained stark. Recall imminent. The very phrase rang like an echo in my skull. Was I among those recalled? I rose, pressing the paper against my chest, and scanned the tree line. Somewhere beyond, I knew the outline of a lone figure waited in the shadows. Agent silhouette renewed by the storm, watching for me, ready to execute Phase 4's final directive. No law enforcement protocol could bulletproof a man against a command buried in his own neurochemistry. I felt the binder's weight at my side, a feeble shield of paper and ink against a conspiracy that would not die. I activated the SUV's headlights and signaled the trooper. "We head south," I said, voice low. "We find every off-limits site within a 100-mile radius. We scatter the evidence, warn everyone. They're moving fast, too fast for protocol." I slid behind the wheel, engine rumbling in the quiet storm. The trooper climbed in beside me. As I pulled onto the wet highway, I felt the terrain shift beneath our tires. The world tilted toward a dawn that meant nothing if the subjects had no conscience. The rain eased, a reluctant sigh from the sky. Up ahead, a billboard loomed through the mist. An advertisement for a roadside diner, its neon flickering in Morse-like stutters. "Eat here," as though trying to communicate in code. I stared at it, heart thudding. If even that sign could blink secrets, what else pulsed beneath the surface of our reality? I gripped the wheel and leaned forward. The binder of black and white lines and the damp calendar pressed against my side, reminding me that I carried the spark of disclosure. But the wind carried doubt. Could I outrun 30 miles of haunted back roads, 50 agents in suits, and the silent tyranny of a compound buried beneath the earth? I broached the radio one last time. Unit 12 to any channel. If you hear me, you're under recall. Run. Silence fell in the cab, heavier than the storm. The road stretched before us, disappearing into the low clouds. Down the highway came the distant hum of an engine. Another SUV, or perhaps a lone subject, speeding toward us. My pulse hammered in my throat as I gathered the wheel. Everything we had done up to this moment meant nothing if the order came through. I took a shallow breath, the storm wrapping around us like a vow. No matter how buried the truth, it always clawed its way back to the surface. How do you stop a secret that's already been set loose? I never imagined the radio crackle would sound like a death knell, but there it was. Static and half-formed words tearing through the silence of my cruiser's cab. I'd been parked at the edge of the old Redwood research compound for 6 hours, waiting for someone, anyone, to pick up the phone. Midnight had long passed, and the county dispatcher had gone off duty. I was on my own. The call had come through an encrypted line. Possible breach. Investigate. No badge number, no supervisor name, just coordinates and a single instruction. Don't let them see you coming. I flipped off my headlights and killed the engine. The world outside went black. Rain pattered on the roof like nervous fingers. The campus was a maze of decaying warehouses and half-buried tunnels. Once, Redwood had been a cutting-edge facility for agricultural bioengineering. Corn spliced with fungal enzymes, livestock fed on nutrient gels. All quietly decommissioned 10 years ago after unexplained diseases surfaced among test animals and a handful of contractors vanished. Officially, the site was fenced, shuttered, and off-limits. Unofficially, everyone in town knew to steer clear after dark. I stepped out into a chill that went beyond temperature. My flashlight cut a cone through the gloom, bouncing off broken windows and walls still stamped with Redwood research. Keep clear. The fence was down in places. Metal posts yanked from the ground. Razor wires snipped and curled like injured snakes. I slipped through one gap, crouching low, every sense on edge. I felt watched. Maybe by scavengers, maybe by wildlife. But something in my gut said this wasn't about deer. A low hum began somewhere ahead, like machinery powering up after a long sleep. My boots crunched gravel as I edged toward an open bay door. I thumbed the flashlight's button, revealing an interior lined with massive storage silos, once used for slurry testing, now empty and gathering rust. In the beam's reach, I saw piles of industrial crates stamped confidential, Redwood Division. Some lay broken, others stacked so high they pressed against the rafters. Between two crates was a slick of dark liquid, gleaming in the light. I knelt, pressed my glove to it. It was warm. Adrenaline flared. Someone had been here recently, maybe still here. I radioed dispatch, but the handheld squealed back static. I pocketed it, trading the limp radio for the comfort of silence. I should have called for backup, but if I did, they'd know I'd gone off the grid. If someone was closing in on Redwood's buried secrets, I was the only one who could stand between them and whatever, or whoever, they were after. I followed the hum deeper into the cavernous hall, past crates and abandoned forklifts with shattered windshields. Old safety posters peeled from walls. Eye protection required. Hazmat zone. No unauthorized personnel. The messages felt ironic now, stretched thin by rust and rot. Every so often, my beam illuminated footprints. Heavy, tire-tread prints in mud tracked in from the outside. They led toward a side corridor, the door to which lay torn from its hinges, its frame splintered as if something huge had forced its way through. Inside that corridor, the air smelled of vinegar and old antiseptic. Overhead, a single dangling light flickered, on, off, on, casting the walls in strobing shadows. The hum pitched higher, like a turbine revving up for an impossible task. My heart thudded so hard I thought the walls might tremble in response. I swallowed, blurred breath, steam in the beam, reminding me I was alive. I moved forward, step by cautious step, until I reached the end of the hall, a reinforced steel door, rivets worn smooth by time. An electronic panel hung beside it, its wires severed. I rested my hand on the door's cool metal. No handle, no obvious way inside. I pressed my flashlight against the panel, drawn in by tiny red and green LEDs blinking out of sequence. Someone must have jury-rigged this panel, kept it alive despite the compound's official darkness. My gloved fingers brushed a slim slot, like a card reader. I had no access card. I tapped it and it lit up, green. Almost automatically, the door's magnetic locks disengaged with a muted sigh, and the panel went dark. I raised my weapon, flashlight in one hand, pistol in the other, and crept through. The room beyond opened into a vast warehouse lit by emergency strips of dim red light. In the center, a platform raised a dozen feet above the ground held 3 stainless steel vats, each capped with domed lids. Midnight rain pounded on the corrugated roof, water dripping through holes and sizzling as it hit electrical conduits. The vats, labeled Batch 17, Batch 18, and Batch 19, were half full of a viscous, gray substance that glowed faintly under the red lights. I swallowed, uneasy. Redwood had been shut down, but something here was live. Behind me, the door shut with finality. I clicked my flashlight across the vats. The labels shone, then flickered and disappeared, replaced by hand-painted numbers that looked at least 20 years old. Someone had repurposed these containers long ago. I crouched to inspect Batch 17. My beam caught a dark smudge on the vat's surface, like a fingerprint. I pressed my palm to it. Faint heat. The hum thrummed through my bones. Then I heard it. A low gurgle coming from inside the vat. My breath caught. I slammed my flashlight onto the lid. It clattered but revealed nothing. The gurgle rose to a wet, choking sound. I shone the light through the translucent walls. Something moved inside, something alive. I staggered back, my heart raced. I radioed for backup, voice shaking. No answer. Rain hammered harder. Overhead, a fluorescent tube popped, plunging the room into near blackness. The emergency light sputtered. In that split second, I thought I felt a presence behind me, a cold exhale on the back of my neck. I spun, flashlight sweeping the shadows. Nothing. Then the vat's LED glow shifted from sickly green to pulsing red. My pistol hand trembled. I steadied my breath, forced my fingers to unclench. The vat's lids began to slide open, slowly, mechanically. Steam hissed out, carrying a stench of rusted metal and rotten vegetation. The gurgle became a rasping cough. I shone my light down into Batch 17. Floating just below the surface was something human-shaped, its face pressed against the inner wall, eyes open, staring dead at me. I fired once, into the vat, and the bullet pierced the steel with a shower of sparks. The shape jolted, sank deeper with a rippling wave that threatened to overflow. I dropped to my heels, revolted and terrified. I looked for the emergency stop, no obvious switch. Panicking, I backed away and crashed into a metal support beam. My shoulder slammed against the jagged edge. Pain flared like fire. Chunks of rust rained from overhead as another tube popped. The vat's lids clanged shut. The gurgling stopped. The red glow faded back to green. I lay on my side, breath ragged, pistol forgotten. Then the vat's lights died completely. Total darkness, broken only by distant thunder. In the black, I heard something drop to the platform floor, a thud, soft but definite. I strained to see or hear more. My radio crackled to life. Unit 8, report. Do you copy? I choked out. I need extraction. Now. Silence then. Copy. ETA 2 minutes. I crawled away from the vats, shotgun voice tight in my chest. What the hell? What is this place? No answer, just that static lull. The hum cut back in, faint again, as if restarting. My flashlight lay on the wet concrete, its beam flickering. I crawled toward it, and the red emergency lights overhead kicked back on full force, burning my retinas. In that glare, I saw fresh footprints leading away from the vats, heading toward a side door marked Exit Only. I tried to stand, my legs buckled. Pain shot through me. I glanced back at the vats one last time. No shapes behind the steel, only the dripping sludge and the faint echo of that human rasp. Then I pulled myself forward, each step by agony, each breath a prayer. The exit door was just ahead. I reached for the handle and froze. Someone had scrawled a message in the wet fog on the window. Stay out. But beside it, in smaller letters, fresh and stiff with congealed sludge, or next. I hadn't planned on coming back, least of all in person, but the lieutenant's voice on the encrypted line left me no choice. He sounded hollow, frantic. Merritt, we've got movement at the old Langford airfield bunker. You're the only one I can trust to get eyes on it without tipping off the wrong people. Langford had been shuttered after the Black Rain incident of '09, when a squad of National Guard trainees fell ill with a hemorrhagic fever that wiped out half of them before the CDC warned everyone to evacuate. The governor declared a state of emergency. The Pentagon cordoned the place off under Martial Law Order 988, never publicly rescinded. Local patrols reported strange lights and low-frequency hums coming from the perimeter. Nobody in Crestwood would drive past after sundown. The only clear route in was the service road through Miller's farm, where the corn drew in fog like a magnet. I left my car 20 yards from the chain-link perimeter. The wire was intact, topped with 3 strands of concertina razor ribbon that glinted viciously in my tack light. Crouching low, I found 2 cuts in the bottom rung, fresh, clean. Someone wanted me to slip through unnoticed. Inside the fence, crushed grass led across gravel and toward the main blast doors, half buried in earth, bearing faded warnings. Biological hazard. Unauthorized entry will be prosecuted to the fullest extent. The road was littered with broken bottles, animal bones, and scraps of what looked like flak jacket sheeting. I stepped over a half-burned tire, heart thudding. The bunker doors yawned open just enough to slip through. Beyond them lay a descending ramp, slick with moss and algae, curving into pitch black. I pinned my light against my chest and drew my pistol, finger resting on the trigger guard. Each step down felt like falling into a coffin. The air carried the tang of iron, old blood or spilled chemicals, and the walls dripped overhead. My boots echoed on concrete as I sighed. I screamed and fired the pistol point blank into the tangle. Bullet fragmented, but the wires quivered on, still alive. I grabbed my flashlight and smashed its head into the control panel by the door. Sparks flew. The emergency lights cut out. Total darkness. Only the hum and that slow pulse. I backed against the wall, breath coming in ragged gasps. I heard footsteps, slow, deliberate, approaching through a heavy metal barrier. The footsteps paused beyond the wall. Then a voice, rough but unmistakable. "Officer Merritt, you shouldn't have come back." A single thud sounded on the other side. The floor vibrated. Then silence. The pulsing wires stopped. The hum faded. I pressed my ear to the wall. Nothing. I raised my flashlight by feel. Click. A dim red glow. On the opposite side of the hatch, I could see the faint outline of the service corridor beyond, and footprints leading away. I sank to my knees. The echo of that voice, "You shouldn't have come back," pounded through my skull. I didn't know who they were, what they wanted, or how deep this dead-end wound went. All I knew was this place was alive, and it was hunting me. And just then, the silence cracked. A slow, mechanical rasp from behind me, as if something huge was excavating its way through the concrete floor. I crawled for the door hatch, every muscle screaming, every breath a struggle. Before I reached it, the heat of heavy boots pressed against my back. The hatch above me rattled. I never made it out of that lab. The details of what happened next are buried in reports I'll never read. But even now, months later, I can still feel those boots on my back. And sometimes I swear I hear the hum of Langford's buried heart calling me back. I woke to the taste of blood and the grinding of metal against bone. A sliver of red emergency light stabbed through the narrow slit above my head. My wrists burned where they'd been shackled to the edge of a steel table. I tried to lift my head, but a dull ache exploded behind my eyes and the world tipped, dragging me back down. The last thing I remembered was that rasping voice, "You shouldn't have come back." And then the weight on my back that pinned me to the stretcher. Now I lay strapped, alone in a room so silent it felt radioactive. My breath came in ragged gulps. I focused on the sliver of light, enough to silhouette my hands, fists clenched. The metal strap across my chest bit into my ribs with every inhale. Sweat ran down my face, mingling with congealed blood at my temple. I tried to wrench free, but the restraints held like iron traps. Panic flickered behind my fatigue, but I forced it down. Panic would only make my heart race faster, and faster meant mistakes. There was a click, sharp enough to crack the silence. My head snapped toward the sound. Footsteps. Heavy boots dragging through damp concrete. They echoed off the walls, then stopped just beyond the table. A figure stepped into the red glow, black coveralls soaking in sweat, face wrapped in shadow. Only a single strip of reflective tape on his shoulder caught the light. He knelt beside me, voice low and calm. "Officer Merritt," he said, "your courage is admirable." He reached out, brushing fingers across my cheek. He wore a surgical glove, the tip torn. "But you should have stayed away." I spat blood. "Who are you?" My voice was hoarse, but I forced strength into it. He leaned back, folding his arms. "Names don't matter down here. You've already seen too much." He straightened, the red light flickering across his chest. Etched, there was a circular insignia, a serrated gear surrounding a skull. I couldn't place it, but it felt familiar, like something from a classified brief. He turned and walked away, boots slapping the floor. The door hissed shut behind him. I tried to scream, but only a gurgle escaped. Minutes passed, long enough for my vision to swim, the edges darkening. I closed my eyes against the swirl. When I dared open them again, the room had changed. The table beneath me vibrated as if attached to a machine. A low thrum filled the air, sounding like a heartbeat. Across from me, where blank wall had been, a panel slid open. Inside sat a bank of monitors, live feeds from multiple angles. The corridor outside the lab, the control room camera I'd smashed, and two I hadn't seen before, trained on a containment cell at the far end of the bunker. In that cell, a hunched figure sat on a metal bench, head bowed. I tried to turn, but the straps held. I pounded the table with my fists. The monitors flickered. The containment door on screen slid open. The figure inside stood slowly. Tall, gaunt, silhouette blurred. It walked toward the glass as if aware I was watching. The monitors pulsed and switched to a single screen. My face, sweat-streaked and bruised. The figure on screen cocked its head, raised its hand, and pressed it against the glass. A soft, wet tapping, like knuckles on skin. Then it didn't move. It just stared, motionless. Eyes, dark pits under a hood. I watched, transfixed, sick to my stomach. The figure in the hood raised a hand again, this time slowly brushing away the mist on the glass. A smear of blood or oil trailed down. Then it lifted its head, and I saw its face. Pale, slick, blank-eyed. Lips pulled back in a grin that didn't reach its eyes. It leaned forward until its forehead pressed against the glass. I screamed, shrank back, pressed myself into the table, but the straps held. My claws scraped at the metal, the monitors flared red, the thrum grew louder, vibrating my bones. Then, everything went dark. When the lights returned, I was alone again. The tapping sound echoed behind me, light, deliberate, like fingernails dragging along metal. I wheeled my head to the direction of the noise, straining against the bond so hard my shoulder seared. There, in the corner, partially hidden in shadow, was a small service hatch I hadn't noticed before. Its edges were smeared with something dark, sticky. The hatch cover rattled, as if something inside was trying to push its way out. My pulse thundered in my ears. I twisted, forcing my hands against the straps, ripping a scream from my throat. The hatch quivered, then slid open a few inches. A single hand emerged, thin, bony, skin stretched tight over bone, long fingers tipped with dirt-black nails. It tapped the hatch's edge twice. Then silence. I realized I wasn't breathing. I dropped my head back to the table, sweat cold on my brow. Slow breaths, I told myself. Slow enough to stay conscious. Above me, steel doors ground open. Floodlights snapped on, revealing a squad of men in coveralls, insignias matching the man who'd taunted me. They wore respirators hanging down at their necks. They stepped into the room, boots clicking on the grated floor. At their head was a woman, short hair plastered to her scalp, eyes sharp and hard. She carried a tablet computer. She strode to the monitors, tapped a few commands. The monitors blinked back to life. The corridor camera, the control room, and the containment cell, now empty. The hooded figure was gone. She glanced at me and smiled, but it was humorless. "He woke up," she said. Her voice was clipped, precise. "We weren't sure he would." One of the men grabbed my arm and yanked me upright. I gasped, shoulder-wrenching, but the strap across my waist held me firm. They hauled me over to the monitors, forcing me to look. I stared at the containment cell feed. Empty cage, metal bench standing askew, no sign of the figure. "What happened to him?" I croaked. The woman tapped her tablet. The monitor view switched to an overhead feed. The cell's camera panned down, revealing an empty floor. Then, in a flash, a dark shape shot past the camera's field, disappearing, too fast to identify. She turned to me. "We're not sure, but it's clear our subject learned something from you." She tapped again. The screen split to show various parts of the complex. Locked doors opening, equipment powering on, silence broken by faint scuttling sounds in the vents. She raised her voice. "Begin Protocol Theta 5. The men closed in. One pressed a stun gun against the small of my back. I jolted at the electric crackle. Another clamped a hood over my head. The world went black, my hearing distorted as if underwater. I felt them drag me across metal grates, echoing footsteps receding, and I lost track of time. When the hood came off, I was in a cell, small, concrete, no light source but a glowing grate in the floor. My legs were free, but my hands were cuffed to a ring in the wall. Across from me was a narrow window barred with steel. Through it, I saw the corridor. Identical cells lined on both sides, lights flickering. No sign of guards. My head throbbed. I propped myself against the wall, staring at the grate. At first, I thought it was power cables, but the grate vibrated gently, like a heartbeat. I knelt and peered through, a tunnel beneath, filled with the same dark fluid I'd seen in the vats at Redwood. It pulsed rhythmically, as if alive. I leaned back, chest tight. The unexplained scuttling in the vents returned, only now it felt closer, right outside my door. The cell's lights dimmed. In the corridor beyond, I heard boots, then stopped, then tapping, soft, deliberate, like fingernails on concrete. I pressed my ear to the wall, heart pounding. Footsteps circled my cell. The tapping moved along, first the left side, then the right. I counted the taps against the concrete. 6 slow taps, then none. Silence settled, heavy as stone. I exhaled, shoulders slumping. The grate's pulsation slowed, then stopped entirely. A moment later, something shifted under the grate. A ripple passed, distorting the grid. The tapping resumed, around my cell, on the beams overhead. 6 more taps, then a whisper, barely audible. "We're right here, officer." My blood ran cold. The last thing I felt before the lights died was the grate's iron bars shifting, upward, and something climbing through. I forced myself to stop trembling long enough to map the walls of my cell by touch. Concrete, rough and cold. The air smelled of mildew and something coppery. Old blood, perhaps, or rust. My hands ached at the cuffs. I tested each with careful pressure until the metal cut into my skin. Beyond the bars, the corridor lights flickered, casting long shadows that reminded me of fingers reaching for me. I shut my eyes against the memory of that hooded face grinning through the glass, its blank eyes drilling into mine. Slowly, I leaned forward and slid my gaze under the grate in the floor. The dark fluid had risen to cover half the opening and pulsed in time with my hammering heart. I wondered if that fluid was the same bio-slurry from Redwood, or something far worse. Whatever it was, it glowed faintly in the red light, as if it were alive. I pressed my palm against the bars, knuckles slick with sweat. Somehow, I had to get out. The tapping at the door started again, soft, deliberate. 6 taps, pause, 3 taps. A code. My training kicked in, 6x3, a signal to lock down or open. The next moment, the overhead speaker crackled. Sub-Unit Theta 5, target status, conscious. Proceed to extraction point Alpha. Use non-lethal containment. The voice was the same clipped female tone I'd heard before. My breath caught. Extraction? They considered me target. That meant they planned to move me, somewhere deeper, or maybe out of the complex entirely. Both options terrified me. I forced myself off the wall, strapped upright, and tested the strength of the cuffs. Nothing gave. The speaker clicked off. The corridor outside went silent. No footsteps. Even the hum in the walls felt muted, like the bunker itself had gone to sleep, waiting. Minutes dragged by, each second measured by the drip of condensation from the ceiling. My mind raced through possible exits. Maybe the grate could open if I could knock the hinge pins loose. Maybe the bars had a flaw where force could snap them. Or perhaps I could lure a guard close enough to catch them off guard. But any attempt would draw attention, and likely end with a bullet or a sedative dart. Then, the cell door clanged open. A man in a black jumpsuit stood in the threshold, holding a small, unmarked tablet. His face was half hidden by a respirator mask. He looked from the tablet to me, then slipped a pair of plastic zip ties from his belt. My pulse spiked. Zip ties meant they intended to bind my torso so I couldn't break free during transport. He stepped in, keeping the door partly closed. "Lie still," he said, voice low. He moved with practiced efficiency, sliding the ties through the cuff rings and around my wrists, securing me tighter to the ring in the wall. Then he stepped back, tapping something into the tablet. Behind him, the corridor glowed as two guards appeared, ghost-like in their respirators, rifles slung at the ready. They motioned for me to stand. I forced my legs under me, teeth gritted against pain. One guard produced a hood identical to the one they'd used before. I backed away, but the two others grabbed my arms and dragged me out. My boots scraped along the bars, sparks of concrete dust flying. We entered the corridor. It stretched in both directions, cells on either side, each dark and empty. The guards moved in near silence, their boots thudding in unison. The faint thrum of machinery drifted through ventilation shafts above. I forced calm, counting my steps, memorizing every junction. They guided me to a side door marked Equipment. Through its small porthole, I saw a storage area. Crates piled high, a forklift parked in the corner, and at least a dozen uniformed figures milling around. Beyond that, a passage led deeper. They pushed me inside, and the door shut with an ominous clang. Inside the storeroom, the men released my arms. Immediately I flexed my wrists, feeling the friction of the zip ties cut into my skin. The guards remained silent, watching. One stepped forward. The short-haired woman from the lab. She held a syringe dripping with clear fluid. I recognized that look. Calm, clinical, predatory. "Just a sedative," she said quietly, eyes cold. "You'll wake in a safe location. Cooperate and no harm will come to you." I spat at her feet. "Safe location? You kidnapped me, experimented on me. You call that safety?" She paused, syringe raised. "Your definition of safe is irrelevant." She plunged the needle into my arm. A burning bloom spread through my veins and my vision blurred at the edges. I staggered, caught by a guard. As the world went black, her voice followed me. "Thank you for your cooperation, Officer Merritt. Welcome to Phase 2. And then, silence. A single unanswered question pulsed in my mind. Phase 2 of what? I woke to the rattling of chains and a distant mechanical thud, like iron doors sealing shut. My skull pounded, each heartbeat echoing in my temples. I fought the fog in my mind, blinking against the dim glow of red emergency lights. The air was acrid, tinged with antiseptic and something rotting. My wrists were free from manacles, but my ankles remained bound. Muscle memory told me I was lying on a cot in a room barely large enough to contain it. I pushed myself up, head swimming, and took in my surroundings. Concrete walls streaked with rust, a single barred window high above just beyond reach, and an array of instruments lined on a small table, syringes, scalpels, vials labeled in peeling tape with terse codes like E2, C Delta, Omega 07. The table legs trembled as machinery hummed behind a grated panel in the floor, the same dark fluid throbbing beneath as before. My rise was met by a hiss, the sliding of a door. I froze, every instinct screaming. A guard in coveralls slipped inside, face concealed by the same respirator mask. He flicked on a blade light, illuminating the corner where a cabinet stood. Its glass door cracked. Inside, rows of jars containing severed samples of tissue suspended in formaldehyde. Labels numbered and dated. The guard clicked off the light and stepped toward me, footsteps heavy. "Morning, officer," he said, voice muffled. He carried a clipboard and a pen, as though arriving for a routine inspection. You slept well? I probed the edges of my memory. The syringe, the sedative drip, waken here. I spat blood onto the floor. Where am I? He tapped the clipboard. Langford Research Annex, Sublevel C. You were in critical condition, stabilized but unconscious. I ground my jaw. Why am I here? He studied me through the mask. Containment breach. You were exposed. Now you're part of the response team. He slid the clipboard under my nose. On it, my name, rank, badge number, and a single line. Status, active participant. I tore my eyes away. I'm not a participant in anything. He shrugged. Labeling is important. Phase 2 begins in 1 hour. We can either have you on board willingly or we can sedate you again. He tapped the clipboard. Your choice. He turned and left without waiting for an answer, the door sealing with a pneumatic hiss. The room's hum swelled, and the grate in the floor vibrated like a living thing. I pressed my palm onto the rust-flaked concrete, mapping the seams between slabs. If I could leverage my weight, maybe I could shift one. But the fluid below might be waist-deep, an unknown risk. My heartbeat slowed as I considered the option. Cooperate or die unconscious. I dragged myself off the cot, legs unsteady. The guard's words echoed, Your choice. If I agreed, would they return me to my family? Or would I vanish deeper into this nightmare? And what was Phase 2? My hand closed around the table's edge. The metal chipped under my grip. I rapped the surface, 3 sharp knocks, hoping someone outside would hear. Nothing but the drone of the vents and the distant click of machinery. I turned toward the barred window and seized the thin ledge, testing the concrete anchors. They held firm. At that moment, the intercom crackled. A distorted female voice. Containment Annex, Sublevel C. Doors will lock in 10 minutes. Proceed to briefing room Delta 10. Then silence. I slumped against the wall, mind racing. If the doors lock, I'll be trapped until Phase 2. I needed to move. The only exit was the door I'd come through, now locked. The window offered no egress. The grate, perhaps a chance. I pulled at the table's leg. It wobbled loose from one bolt. With effort, I twisted it free. The instrument tray clattered to the floor, syringes rolling away. I pried the table leg against the concrete seam covering the grate. The bolt holes aligned with the seam. Metal scraped against metal. Sparks flew under the red light as I worked to lever the slab. Sweat stung my eyes. After what felt like forever, the grate shifted an inch. The humming fluid pulsed visibly. I pried harder. The grate rose enough for me to see beneath. Pipes, valves, cables, too many unknowns to assess depth. Yet I smelled fresh air moving through those shafts. It was my only hope. I undid my ankle restraints with shaking fingers. The guard's zip ties were cut too tight, but I managed to slice through the nylon with a shard of metal I'd tapped off the table. Free at last, I discarded the restraints and hoisted myself onto my elbows, then rolled onto the grate. My pack, slung at the foot of the cot, contained my knife and multi-tool. I braced my shoulder and leveraged myself through the opening. The fluid lapped at my chest, freezing cold. I slid down into darkness, knife in hand, foot finding a pipe to lower on. The shaft angled downward, slick with condensation. I eased myself along, careful to not plunge into hidden cavities. Above, the grate closed with a sudden clang. Someone had reset it. Now I was sealed beneath. Above me, the distant echo of boots on concrete told me I was discovered, but I had no choice. I inched forward, vanishing into the subterranean veins of the complex. The corridor beyond the grate opened into a narrow service tunnel, dimly lit by flickering emergency strips overhead. The air was damp, suffused with the scent of mold and old oil. Cables and pipes snaked along the walls, some labeled in half-erased lettering, AIR, water, coolant. The hum of machinery was louder here, rhythmic like a heartbeat. I pressed myself flat, listening. A guard's rambling voice echoed somewhere ahead. He must have broken out from C. They'll be tight on time. Protocol dictates containment before dawn. Containment before dawn. The words resonated. If they locked down the annex, I'd never see daylight again. I slid along the wall, knife at the ready, following the glow of emergency lights receding around a corner. My flashlight, still in my pack, felt comforting, but I resisted flicking it on. Better to move unseen. I rounded the passage's bend and nearly collided with a maintenance cart. Piled atop were panels, filters, tools. I ducked behind it as two guards marched past, rifles slung. Their boots echoed. They paused at an intersection, conferring in low tones. I crouched, knife poised, heart thrumming. They parted, taking separate routes, one toward the barred window above my cell, which I recognized now as part of sublevel B, and the other heading down into deeper corridors marked Research Quarantine. Neither wore the circular skull and gear insignia. These were generic security contractors, likely hired to patrol. Their passing meant one guard isolated, but I was alone. I had to keep moving. The intercom's countdown to lockdown was ticking. I followed the guard who went toward quarantine, hoping his path would lead me to a control room or external exit. The tunnel narrowed, pipes overhead dripping a steady rhythm. Then I spotted a door to my left, wider than maintenance hatches and labeled egress. No keys in the guard's pocket. I'd have to pick the lock. I set my pack down, extracted my knife, and pried the panel beside the door's handle. With trembling fingers, I bypassed the locking mechanism, made easier by years of patrol training. The lock clicked. I swung the door open. Beyond lay a stairwell lit by a single bulb at the top. Relief surged. I climbed, 2 steps at a time, until I reached a small landing. Ahead was another door marked Exterior Access and a round metal wheel, like a ship's hatch. I turned the wheel. Heavy gears groaned as it opened. A blast of cold night air hit me, charged with electricity. Rain spat against my face through the gap. I slipped through into the pitch dark, heart racing with hope. I'd made it to the outside, somewhere beyond their reach. But as I pulled the hatch closed behind me, I felt it. An oppressive weight pressing in, a soft electric hum in the air. Above me, the sky was a bruise of storm clouds. In that moment, I realized freedom here was an illusion. They might lose sight of me tonight, but Langford's buried heart would never let me go entirely. It would hunt me, whispering through the shadows of my mind long after the thunder faded. And as I stumbled into the rain I left behind, water washing sludge from my boots, I realized the final, unanswered question that would stay with me always. Who, in God's name, were they really protecting? I slipped through the tunnel's dripping darkness and emerged beside a low-ceilinged maintenance corridor I'd never seen on the bunker drawings. My chest tightened as I heard distant machinery, but also voices muffled and urgent. Voices I almost recognized. I pressed my back against the cold wall, letting my eyes adjust to the flickering red glow of emergency lights overhead. The narrow passage forked 2 ways. One branch led toward a grated access panel I'd crawled out of, the other descended further into shadow. I chose the downward slope, hoping it would lead me closer to ground level, and farther from whatever twisted project Langford had become. Each step echoed on metal grating, the rhythm syncing with my pounding pulse. The air grew warmer, tinged with the stale scent of heated oil and something sour, like fermenting chemicals. I paused at a junction, listening. A guard's garbled voice drifted from somewhere below, speaking in clipped phrases over a radio. Affirmative. Proceed to secondary containment. Subject 1. Status unknown. My stomach dropped. They'd already classified me. I scanned the walls for identification. Faded stencils marked the corridor, sub-beta and service level 4. According to the schematics I'd memorized during training, service level 4 sat just above the deep research labs and below the surface. I had to find an exit route upward. I continued, following rusted conduit pipes that snaked overhead. At one corner, a small door labeled elevator stood ajar. I crept closer, flashlight illuminating the metal interior of a service elevator, open and empty. I ducked inside and located the call switch. An old lever sprung loose. I pulled it down and, with a shuddering groan, the elevator lurched upward. The cables hummed, metal support shrieked, and the car rattled as it passed one level, then another. My heart pounded, both relief and dread mingling. I'd have to trust that no one else needed that elevator, because once I moved, I'd be trapped if it stopped at the wrong floor. The doors slid open with a hiss on service level 2. This floor was nearly deserted. Storage racks lined the walls. Some collapsed under their own weight. The humming of a ventilation fan turned high-pitched here, and the corridors smelled of ozone. I stepped out, gun drawn, scanning for movement. A single security light overhead flickered, revealing a panel where cables had been ripped out. An escape route, perhaps, bypassing normal routes. I approached the panel, pried off the cover, and exposed a tangle of wiring. Among them was a thicker cable marked in peeling tape. Exfil 480 volts. My gut said this ran toward an external power source, likely the old blast doors. If I could follow it, maybe I'd find an exit. I disconnected the conduit clamps and unwound the cable from its harness. It felt heavy, alive with residual electricity. I slung it over my shoulder like a lifeline. Footsteps echoed from down the hall. I ducked behind a fallen metal beam, chest tight. 2 guards came into view, generic uniforms with reflective stripes and respirators dangling at their waists. They were unarmed, carrying maintenance toolkits. One pointed a flashlight down at the shaft where the cable had been. "Sabotage," he muttered. "They're everywhere." They moved on, voices trailing behind them. I waited until their echoes faded, then pressed onward, following the cable's path. The corridor opened into a vaulted chamber where massive transformers once sat. Now dead hulks of copper coils and rusted steel. The air thrummed here as if the machines remembered their power. I ran my fingers along the cable, guiding myself toward a service doorway marked Surface Hatch. I pushed it open and was bathed in moonlight for the first time in hours. A battered staircase led upward, slick with moss and rainwater that seeped in through cracks overhead. I climbed, cable trailing behind me. Each step brought the cold night air closer. At the top, I reached a heavy round hatch with a large wheel, like the one leading out to the farm road. I turned the wheel, it resisted, then gave way with a hydraulic hiss. As the hatch lifted, the wind hit me, cold and sharp with the scent of pine and rainfall. A curtain of rain fell through the opening, pattering on my helmet and gear. I climbed out onto a narrow service platform, wet wood creaking beneath my boots. Below, the compound's perimeter fence lay in shadow, distant red strobes blinking. I ducked and crawled across the platform, using the cable as a guide. It led to a utility pole where a junction box had been left open. Inside, the wires ran off into the night toward a cluster of maintenance sheds. I followed them, sloshing through mud and broken glass. Suddenly, a spotlight snapped on behind me, blinding white. I froze, heart pounding. A drone of a high-caliber rifle charging sounded. I risked a glance. A guard tower across the yard, silhouette of a heavy weapon pointed directly at me. A radio crackled. "Unidentified subject on the ridge, take caution." I raised my hands, stepping into the light. Rain streamed off my coat and mud clung to my boots. The guard tower rifle mounted swung to track me. I measured my options. Drop the cable and raise my hands, or try to sprint for cover in the darkness. My mind raced. Then a second spotlight cut across the compound, sweeping toward the east boundary. Footsteps thundered behind me. Heavier, deliberate. I turned to see the short-haired woman, flanked by two guards, striding down the muddy slope, rifles at the ready. Her respirator glinted under the spotlight. She raised a pistol and called out, "Merritt, stand down." My lungs burned. The fence was 40 yards away, beyond it, dark woods. If I could slip into the trees, maybe outrun their night vision. But the rifle in the tower and her pistol cut off my angles. I gripped the cable, weighing my choices. Then another light snapped on. A handheld spotlight to my right. I pivoted and saw a second figure emerging from the shadows. A man in coveralls, helmet, insignia mask, raising a flare pistol. He fired. The flare arced overhead, trailing sparks. Darkness gave way to orange light, illuminating the entire compound. In that harsh glow, I saw barricades of shipping crates, guard towers lining every angle, and dozens of men converging on me from every direction. My breath caught. I was completely surrounded. The high rifle tracked my left, the flanking guards on my right, the tower's weapon focused above, and the compound lights revealing any possible escape routes. I tightened my grip on the cable, watching the woman advance. Flare, light swinging over her. Face. She spoke into a radio. Target confirmed. Prepare the sedative rounds. Her lips curved in that same humorless smile. I took a breath, weighed the cable in my hand, my only leverage, and realized there was no running. My only chance was to fight the darkness with something they hadn't anticipated. I yanked the cable free from the junction box, yanking the wires loose. Sparks flew, and the power grid of the entire compound flickered. Lights died in a domino effect. The spotlight in the tower blinked out. Flanking guards shouted into their radios as their weapons powered down. The flare's light dimmed, then went dark. Rain pounded on my helmet, the compound submerged in blackout. I stood in near total darkness, the only illumination my fading flashlight beam. I dropped the cable, raised my pistol, and called out, "Merritt, badge 4532, I'm coming through." Footsteps froze. The woman slipped behind cover. I flooded the nearest guard's chest with hail from my flashlight, blinding him. Then I sprinted toward the darkness beyond the fence, rain and mud spattering my face. Behind me, alarms began to wail, electrical surges triggering emergency generators. I kept running until I collapsed in the tree line, gulping cold air. The compound lights flared on again, spotlights stabbing through the woods as guards poured out of the gate. But their night vision couldn't compensate for the mud slick and falling rain. I vanished into the trees, soaked and bloodied, but alive. As I lay in the underbrush, chest heaving, I realized the compound's blackout had been temporary. Their backup systems would kick in soon, and they would hunt the forest edge until they found me, or forced me back. I closed my eyes against the storm, the final, twisting thought echoing in my mind. If I survive the night, what becomes of the lives they've contained below, and of the darkness I carry with me forever? In the days that followed my escape, I never stopped moving. The rain-soaked forest gave way to winding county roads, abandoned farmhouses, and backwoods hollows where I learned to sleep with one eye open. I kept my badge hidden, my name unspoken, and my wounds bandaged but unhealed, not just on my skin, but in the part of me that hears the pulse of darkness. Every time I closed my eyes, I could feel it. Langford's buried heart, the low thrum of those vats, the rasping whispers of something that should not be alive. I tried to drown it out with coffee, radio static, late-night patrols on empty highways. But even the roar of my cruiser's engine couldn't silence the echo of those cells, the sight of that hooded figure, or the knowledge that whatever they'd released was still out there. I reached out to federal authorities, FBI, CDC, even congressional aides. I handed over every photograph, every file I'd managed to smuggle out. The VATs, labeled Batch 17 to 19, the videos from the command camera, the notes on Operation Black Falcon, the redacted memos about Phase 2. At first, they listened. Then, they passed me from desk to desk, promising investigations underway, hearings scheduled, protections imminent. But every lead went cold, phone lines went dead. My secure email account was locked. That hum started again in my apartment. Appliances charging on their own, lights flickering in patterns I recognized from emergency strips underground. I began finding strange symbols drawn in chalk on the back roads I used. A serrated gear around a skull, half erased by rain but always legible enough. My tires cut through them at dawn, but next time I returned, they were back. My mailbox contained nothing but a single photo. My own face, taken at night. Angles matching the view from one of their hidden cameras. Standing at the grate beneath my cell, illuminated by faint red light. One morning, I answered a knock at my door to find a man in coveralls, no insignia, respirator slung at his side, clipboard in hand. He flashed a badge so worn I couldn't read it. He told me he was reassigned to my case, that he'd provide new protection. His eyes were empty. He handed me an envelope stamped Phase 3 and said simply, "We'll be in touch." I closed the door and sat on my couch. The envelope lay on the coffee table, its seal broken. Inside was a single sheet of paper with one line typed in red ink. "Containment is your new mission." I burned that paper in the fireplace, but the words still burned in my mind. If I was to contain them now, did that make me one of them? A warden of nightmares? Last night, I dreamt I was back in that lab at Redwood, standing before Batch 17 as its lid opened on its own. The hooded figure stepped out, water dripping from its sleeves, and pressed a cold hand to my chest. I woke to rain on the window and the low hum of my refrigerator. But I heard something else beneath it. The faint, rhythmic pulse of metal against metal. I checked my phone. No messages, no missed calls. Just one new photo in my gallery. Picture of my own apartment, taken from the darkened hallway outside. And I know they're watching. My badge might still be tucked in my pocket, but the lines between hunter and hunted, protector and prisoner have blurred. I'm left with one question that refuses to let me sleep. When the real experiment begins, will I be the one containing the darkness, or will it contain me? I spent the next week chasing shadows. Every lead I uncovered wove me deeper into a web I wasn't sure I wanted to untangle. At dawn, I traced county records to a defunct logging road that skirted the old Redwood facility. Only now, the entrances had been obliterated under new layers of asphalt, indistinguishable from the surrounding tarmac. At night, I drove past shuttered warehouses in distant towns, tracing rumors of unmarked delivery trucks offloading steel containers stamped with the same serrated gear skull. Each time I arrived, the yard sat empty, as if someone had pulled up stakes minutes before I got there. My apartment became a vault of evidence: maps marked with GPS points, photos of vats and skeletons, sequences of timestamps showing how they moved me from Redwood to Langford and beyond. I replayed the footage until my face on the screen looked like a stranger, haunted, hollowed. I cataloged every detail: the color of the emergency lights, the particular rasp in the voice that called me participant, the way those hats glowed with something inhuman. I began to hear the hum even in the quietest moments. Washing dishes, typing reports, lying in bed. It felt alive, like a second heart beating in my chest. Then I got the text message: no more digging. Just that, from an untraceable burner number. My stomach knotted, but I bristled instead of backing down. I recognized the tone, a warning buried under layers of self-preservation. If they thought I'd stop, they were wrong. I planned my next move. A midnight raid on the site identified in a redacted memo as Project Gauntlet, a supposed cleanup operation 2 counties over. My informant, a retired engineer who'd slipped me a faded schematic, claimed the site sat under an abandoned mill, its basement flooded with wastewater diverted from Redwood. He said the gear skull insignia had been carved into support beams there by men who believed themselves guardians of something sacred. I arrived under heavy clouds, rain drizzling off the corrugated roof. The mill's windows were boarded, but a service hatch in back hung open. I scooted inside, feet slipping on slick oil stains. My light splashed across rusting conveyor belts, conveyor shafts, and overhead catwalks that groaned under my weight. I followed the schematic down 3 levels of stairs until I reached a reinforced door marked Limited Access, Equipment Storage. I picked the lock in seconds. Hand drills long ago filed off my key ring, and slipped inside a high-ceilinged vault. Rows of steel drums lined the walls, each labeled with cryptic codes: R172, G-Suite, Echo-12. I scanned their tops. Dried rings of dark residue crusted the metal lids. One drum lay on its side, its lid gouged open, revealing a pulpy mass of decaying material that smelled of mold and antiseptic. I fell back, hand to mouth, heart hammering. Beyond the drums, a grated walkway led to a pit cut into the concrete floor. A ladder descended into near-pitch darkness. I hesitated, every instinct screaming to retreat, but I needed answers. I hooked my flashlight over the pit's edge and shone it downward. The beam revealed a shallow pool of murky water, stained red along the edges. Floating in it were bone fragments, teeth, rib segments, scattered like flotsam. My breath caught. This was worse than Redwood. Here, the refuse of experimental victims had been dumped, left to dissolve. I climbed down, boots cold in the liquid. Each step echoed in the chamber. At the bottom, I knelt and pressed my gloved hand into the water, feeling grit and bone shards shift beneath. A flash of movement caught my eye, the glint of glass jars half submerged along the wall. I waded over and hauled one free. Inside, suspended in a cloudy solution, a human heart, stripped of tissue, preserved in formaldehyde. It bobbed against the glass, valves and vessels traced in black. Someone had gone to elaborate lengths to keep this organ intact. I felt bile rise in my throat, but forced myself to lift the jar, secure it under my arm. As I turned, I heard footsteps above, metal on metal. Voices, muffled but urgent. I fumbled for my radio, but the battery was dead. I ducked behind a drum, heart slamming so hard I thought it might burst. The voices grew louder, accompanied by the drone of a generator powering up somewhere, likely the pit's pumps. A flood of emergency lights cut on overhead, burning the darkness into harsh white. The drums cast long shadows across the water. Men in coveralls swarmed the pit's edge. One held a rifle. Another carried a thermal scanner that painted my hiding spot in red on a handheld display. My mind raced. Could I make it back through the maze of drums? Or would I be trapped here, surrounded? I weighed my options. My phone lay in my pocket. I might yet call for help. But whom could I trust? The local sheriff's office had turned me away. Federal agents had ghosted me. If I radioed them now, they'd trace the call, and I'd lose the element of surprise. Plus, they might not come. Not after all the evidence vanished or got redacted. I lifted the jar, heart beating in my chest like a second drum, and stepped into the open. The men froze. I raised a fist, voice steady. I'm unarmed and alone, but I have what you're hiding. I pounded the jar against my palm, denting the glass. It cracked, a spiderweb fracture across its surface. They hesitated, then advanced. The man with the scanner pointed it at the cracks. A single report on his display. Containment compromised. Subject 4532 at risk. He looked at me, eyes darting between the jar and my face. The leader stepped forward, tall, broad, skull insignia patch on his shoulder. He held up a hand. You don't understand what you've taken, he said. That heart is more than a relic. It's a key. I met his gaze, chest tight. A key to what? He exchanged a glance with his men. A key to the next phase, and you've just triggered it. My breath caught. The jar quivered in my grip. Liquid sloshing, shards loose inside. I felt the hum in my teeth, the pulse of water in my boots. The lights overhead flickered, and I realized the entire mill was powered on. Every motor, every generator, feeding something I couldn't see. Then the floor beneath my feet vibrated. A low thrum turned into a mechanical roar. The man with the rifle shouted orders. I backed away, jar held tight, watching the liquid inside swirl. The crack widened. A drop of preservative slashed across my knuckles. Behind me, the drums began to rattle on their shelves. The grated walkway shuddered. The man with the skull patch barked, "Secure him!" I spun, jar raised and charged. He stumbled back, surprised. I swung the jar. Glass exploded against his chest, spraying formaldehyde and heart tissue across his coveralls. He staggered, clutching his chest as though the organ's last beat had stopped his heart, cold. The other men froze, then lunged. I bolted across the drums, shards cutting my palms, formaldehyde stinging my eyes. The pit's pumps whined, water churning. I leapt up the ladder, knees scraping concrete, jarless but still clutching bone and glass shards. At the top, the exit hatch banged open. I tumbled into the mill's backyard, rain pelting my shoulders. The men spilled out behind me, shouting. Floodlights snapped on, but I didn't slow down. I pierced the night, disappearing into the downpour, bone fragments and glass in my pocket. The pump's roar fading behind the shelter of trees. Even now, the sound clings to me. The roar of containment breaking, the drip of that hardish water, the echo of my own boots on the mill's metal floors. I don't know what key I carry or what door it might open, but the question that follows me through every storm, every blackout, every restless night is sharper than any glass shard. What unlocks when the final gate falls, and who will live to see it? I still wake to the phantom scrape of a metal latch turning in the dark, even though I know I locked that gate myself. It was late October when I first set foot inside the old missile assembly yards north of Millhaven, a sprawling compound of rusted launch tubes and overgrown access roads marked Danger, Authorized Personnel Only. My partner and I had been called in after some joggers reported hearing voices echoing from within the perimeter fence. The joggers said the gate was chained tight, the warning signs fresh, yet they heard footsteps and distant laughter that stopped whenever they tried to peer through the chain-link mesh. They thought it was kids trespassing. I thought differently. We arrived just before 2 a.m. The rain was coming down in sheets, turning the gravel driveway into slick mud that splashed up against the cruiser's doors. My partner, O'Neill, stayed by the truck with the spotlights trained on the fence line. I climbed out, water dripping from my coat collar, and hit the gate chain with the flashlight. No movement, no footprints in the mud leading up to it, and no signs anyone had touched it for weeks. The jogger's story didn't add up. Nothing about a secured compound sounds like a late-night playground. I radioed it in. 4 Bravo, fence secure, no tracks. Hearing voices reported just inside. Stand by. O'Neill's tone crackled back. Copy that. You cleared to breach if you need. I paused, hand on the bolt cutters. The weather mask I wore fogged immediately, turning my world into a misty tunnel. I angled my head down, tightened my grip, and, snap, cut through the chain. The gate swung inward with a low moan that vanished in the drizzle. Inside, the beam of my flashlight revealed a tangle of weeds and broken signage half submerged in puddles. I stepped through the gap, boots sinking into the clay. Every few feet there were old placards. Missile site restricted. Railcar maintenance area. Emergency air intake. Their letters had long faded, but the shapes still pressed warning into my mind. The compound was supposed to be decommissioned in the early 90s and stripped clean. Yet here were reminders of its purpose, relics of a past hurricane that no one bothered to haul away. I followed the edge of a long concrete bunker, paused where the wall curved inward, and heard it. A faint shuffle that shifted with the wind. Not wood against metal, but wet fabric brushing concrete. I spun and caught a glimpse of flashlight glare deep in an access tunnel. My gut clenched. Dispatch, I've got movement inside 10-4. Static. I glanced at my radio, then back into the tunnel. The light had vanished. My breathing was too loud in my ears. I took a cautious step forward. Water trickled down my neck as I moved, and the beam revealed differences in the concrete texture. Fresh scratches, almost claw-like, along the base of the wall. That shouldn't happen. This place was closed, unvisited. Nothing alive was supposed to be here. I clicked off my light and waited, pressing my back against the cold wall. In the dark, I thought I heard a humming. Not the wind, not rain, low, constant, like a generator set half buried underground. I flicked the flashlight back on and followed the sound toward a locked door stamped with a diamond-shaped biohazard symbol. The padlock was newer than everything else, gleaming stainless steel with no sign of rust. I knelt in the mud and looked up at it, boots soaked, heart pounding. How did someone get inside, repair a padlock, and leave no tracks? I radioed again. 4 Bravo, locked a door at corridor 2. Padlock intact, no brake marks. Possible unauthorized access. Respond? Silence. I hated that radio silence. It leaves your own thoughts echoing like gunshots. I knew protocol. Call for backup, mark it, secure the site. Instead, I found my hand unzipping my coat pocket, pulling out a small crowbar. This wasn't standard, but neither was any of it. The lock yielded with a quick pry. Inside was a small chamber lit by a single, sputtering fluorescent tube. Another thing that shouldn't have power. My light joined its flicker, revealing rows of metal shelving holding dusty vials. Their labels were gone, but cracked remnants of hazard stickers clung to a few. A clipboard lay on a shelf, pages yellowed but intact, headed Project Echo, Sensory Feedback Trials, Phase 2. The entries were dated over 2 decades ago. No one in this department had mentioned any trials here. I ran a finger across a line noting subjects exposed to auditory enhancements. Prisoners, volunteers, nobody knew. Why would they stash these records under lock and key, then ditch them? I scanned the shelves. Each vial sat in a metal rack with its neighbor. Empty spaces here and there. The missing spots felt deliberate, like someone had removed specific samples. My light beam flicked across a stray piece of paper pinned to a corkboard. A map of the compound with a red circle around a hatchway marked Personnel Exit Only. Dirt trails led from that hatch into dense undergrowth outside the fence. I pressed my forehead against the glass of the board to read the tiny scrawled note, Subject Relocation, Unnoticed Retrieval. My blood ran cold. Retrieval of what? From where? The hum below me deepened. It wasn't steady, more like gear teeth meshing, slowing, speeding. I looked down to find the concrete floor in front of me fractured, a jagged crack just big enough for a hand to slip through. No cover, no grill, just a gap. My crowbar tapped on the splintered edge. It resonated like bone. I set the brace of my elbow against the wall and slid the bar down into the crack, prying. The floor trembled, small debris scattered into darkness. Then, with a quiet snap, the slab shifted enough for me to peer down, a shaft into absolute black. The humming was louder now, echoing from below. The concrete walls of the shaft were thick, rebar exposed in places, old wiring loosely draped down into the abyss. My instincts screamed to press my light back into service, but before I could, the fluorescent above me buzzed violently and died, plunging the room into dim shadows. My flashlight beam rattled as I knelt on the wet floor, training it into that shaft. The hum crescendoed, then stilled. Silence followed, deeper than the tunnel beyond the padlocked door. I felt my pulse in my throat. I raised the crowbar again, and something moved down there, a shape drifting into view as if carried on an unseen current. It was nothing human, yet it had the outline of a torso, limbs blurred like a shadow seen through fogged glass. It tilted, paused, and I swore it stared back at me, though it had no face. My mouth went dry. The shaft walls were too tight for me to descend without proper gear. But I remembered the hatch on the map, a hidden exit, probably linked to those shafts. If someone, or something, used it to move vials out, they might still be inside, watching. My radio crackled again. O'Neill's voice ghostly through static. "You copy?" "We got skimmers on the cameras. Site's quarantined, backups 10 minutes out." "You good?" I swallowed. "Negative. Aye, there's more down here. Possible labs, subjects, something alive." I flicked the light up. The control room door behind me swung shut on its own, the latch clicking. I stood, backing away, but my boots slipped in the mud. As I steadied myself, I glanced back at the open hatch and saw the shape again, descending into darkness, turning its head toward me. I called out, voice hollow, "Who's there? Show yourself." No answer. Just the press of midnight air, thick with rain and that distant hum. I took a breath, raised the crowbar for light, and leaned forward. The hatch gaped like a mouth waiting to swallow me, but whatever was down there had already started returning the question. I kicked at the hatch's edge, trying to force it closed, but the concrete slab ground against the lip and refused to budge. That's when I realized the hatch wasn't simply an exit, it was a one-way door. Whatever that shape was down there, it had slipped away through that gap. And now I was alone with the echoing hum of pipes and a cold draft rising from below. My flashlight swung wildly as I knelt, pressing my weight into the crowbar, levering the hatch upward. It inched, then jammed again. My coat snagged on a jagged edge, snagged tight, and I spat out a curse. More mistake than threat. Above, the padlock room's fluorescent buzzed back to life, its half-broken bulb sputtering overhead. I jerked my head upward. Shadows danced across the spilled vials and yellowed pages. A tray knocked to the floor with a clatter behind me. I whirled and caught the beam on a metal cart rolling on rusted casters, though I'd left it against the wall. My heart lurched. The cart came to rest against the shelf, as if pushed, but there was no one there. I shone the light into the corners. Empty. The only thing breathing was me. I yanked the hatch closed with my shoulder, slammed it twice until it clicked. Rainwater dripped from my hair as I backed into the corridor, crowbar raised like a sidearm. My mind raced through procedure. Resecure area, wait for backup. Yet something about the compound felt alive, resentful, watching. I radioed in, voice trembling more than I would have liked. Dispatch, lock that hatch. Someone's down there. I don't know what, but it's moving. Static. Then O'Neill, calm but clipped. Roger. Cameras are back online. Gates locked. ETA 5 minutes. Can you hold until then? I swallowed, pressed the radio tighter. Hold. I'll do my best. The corridor's edge curved away into darkness. I switched off the sputtering overhead light and clicked my flashlight on, following the tunnel deeper. Every drop of water on the concrete roof sounded like a sniper's shot. Each breath felt loud enough to betray me. Past the padlocked door, the corridor branched. One path slanted upward toward what looked like an emergency exit sign, paint flaking off the walls. The other turned downward, toward a grated vent that vibrated with low resonance. I chose down, back toward the center of the compound, because the structure of these sites always placed central utilities in the lowest levels. If there was a generator keeping lights on somewhere, it would be down there. I needed to understand what was powering this place at 3 a.m. My boots clunked over metal grating, echoing through a shaft large enough to drive a truck through. That hum grew into a mechanical heartbeat. Steam hissed from pipes overhead, and the smell of ozone stung the back of my throat. I paused at a junction where water pooled against the wall, tracing fresh footprints that disappeared into the mist. The prints were too small for O'Neill's boots, too human to be animal, but they led away from the grated floor toward a heavy blast door. It was arched steel, scored with deep gouges, and stamped Testing Bay. No padlock, just a latch that had been oiled recently. I placed my hand on the latch. My knuckles whitened as I tugged. It swung open inward, and I flicked my light across a vast chamber lined with observation windows. Each window looked onto a separate cell or test chamber. Some were empty, others contained odd contraptions. A chair bolted to the floor with restraints, a series of microphones pointing inward, and a tangle of cables leading through tiny apertures in the walls. One chamber held a desk cluttered with loose pages, handwritten logs, medical forms, scribbled names with dates. I crouched at the glass and read, Subject 23, Non-compliant auditory feedback. Required dosage at 2300 hours. Subject 24. Voluntary dropout. Faint signals detected in EEG tracings. Transfer to Bay B2. Subject 25. Irregular heartbeat. Auditory hallucinations reported. Procedure delayed. The date stamp read October 1994. Then I noticed newer entries scrawled in the margins. Continue trials. Increase isolation. Recover subject if feasible. Those notes weren't 25 years old. They were fresh, written in pen that hadn't fully dried before being thumbed. My pulse raced. Somebody was still running experiments here, using humans for auditory conditioning, and I'd stumbled into the nerve center. A noise from the next chamber made me spin around. A soft thump, like someone shifting in a cot. I played the beam across the windows. In Bay B2, I saw movement beyond the glass. A figure slumped in a chair, head tilted, breathing too slow to be natural. My light caught the reflection of his eyes, wide, unblinking, staring. The glass had condensation halfway up, but the face was clear, gaunt, hollowed cheeks, mouth slightly open. It turned toward me, lips moving, but no sound came through the thick glass. The figure raised a hand and pressed it against the pane, smearing a fingerprint through the mist. I swallowed and stepped back. The chamber door beside me slid shut with a pneumatic hiss. I whipped around to find another chamber door at the far end, sliding open, though there was no control panel in sight. My radio crackled with static that resolved into O'Neill's voice. "Boss, you okay?" "We're seeing shadows on camera, like silhouettes pacing." I shook my head, unsteady. "There's someone in here, subject, something, alive. We need extraction now." I half expected backup to barrel through, guns drawn. Instead, the corridor remained empty, lights flickering overhead. The mist thickened, and I could hear my own breath forming fog in the beam. I moved past the observation windows toward the chamber, heart hammering. The log sheets fluttered as if stirred by a breeze, though air vents were sealed. I spotted a keypad on the wall beside the chamber door. A touch screen cracked. A prompt blinked. "Enter code." Beneath it, someone had scrawled in marker, "Just want to hear you." My throat closed. I couldn't tell if the message was a plea or a threat. My radio bleeped, and I dropped it. The dials spun wildly, then settled on a new channel. A distorted voice whispered, "You shouldn't be here." It was my voice. My own tone played back through the radio, slowed and trembling. The moment I lifted my hand to cover my mouth, a door slammed somewhere behind me. The lights dimmed, and the fluorescent above the hatch began to flicker again. Then the whisper came from the chamber speaker. "Please, listen." I froze. The chamber door slid open. The figure inside remained motionless, gaze fixed on nothing. The lights cut out entirely, and I was left with only the red glow of the keypad and the hum of hidden machinery. My flashlight's beam bounced across the metal floor, and in that twisted glare, I saw something leaning in the doorway behind me. An outline that matched my own shape. I turned slowly, raising the crowbar. The corridor was empty, but I heard breathing, my own, magnified by speakers hidden in the walls. I stepped toward the keypad, fingers trembling, and typed the only code I could think of, my badge number. The screen flashed green. The chamber door groaned open wider, but it didn't reveal the subject. Instead, the wall beyond it slid aside into a hidden alcove, and a staircase whispered downward. I looked back at the padlock chamber, at the rafters where wires snaked through broken ducts. I realized then that I was deeper than I intended, drawn by the promise of answers but trapped by my own curiosity. The hum returned, steady, insistent, like a heartbeat in the dark. My radio coughed and O'Neill shouted, "Hang tight, we're on site, do not engage." But I was already halfway down the stairs, each step ending in wet stone that gleamed under my light. At the bottom was a single door carved with a symbol I recognized from the biohazard sticker, a circle with 3 interlocking crescents. Beyond its frame lay a chamber that pulsed with low blue light. Shadows danced against the walls, shifting as if alive. I swallowed and reached for the doorknob. The handle spun on its spindle, but the door didn't open. A voice crackled overhead, this time not through my radio but through the speakers embedded in the ceiling. "You've come so far." It wasn't my voice. It wasn't any voice I knew. it was calm, soft, and resonant, too measured to be a recording. It spoke directly to me, to the marrow of my bones. I pressed my forehead against the cold metal and whispered, "What the hell are you?" No answer, only the low hum, growing louder, filling my ears until every thought was drowned in the vibration. Then, above the noise, I heard my own gasp. The doorknob clicked, and the door swung open just enough to let a sliver of that blue light escape, meant outside or to another wing. I pressed my palm to the bar and shoved. The door swung open into a dim hallway with no lights. In the darkness, I could hear every breath, mine and something else's, ragged, paced, deliberate. I clicked my radio. 4 Bravo, I'm in a secondary corridor, no headlights. Proceeding to exit, static, no response. All I heard was that second breathing. I reached for my flashlight, but it was gone, left behind in the tube chamber. My hand shook as I patted my pockets. Nothing. No crowbar, only the key card. I squared my shoulders and slid the bar down with both hands. The door eased open, revealing a staircase spiraling upward. The stairs smelled of oil and mildew. I climbed, counting each step. 1, 2, 3. The breathing echoed, matching my pace, sometimes falling behind, sometimes rushing ahead. By step 17, my lungs burned. I paused on a landing and looked up. A single exit door, bright red, labeled Staff Egress, with a small window. Beyond the window, I saw a tangle of tree branches and a patch of moonlight. Outside. I took one more step and footsteps above me. Heavy, deliberate. Not mine. I tensed and reached for the door handle. It was hot to the touch. Cold air bled in. Outside, wind rattled the window. I gripped the handle and pushed, but the door was locked. A badge reader sat to the right, red light pulsing. I pulled the key card from my pocket and swiped. It clicked green. I shoved again and the door edged inward. A rush of wind blasted down the stairwell, carrying rain and distant thunder. My pulse pounded. I felt exposed, like animals slinking through the dark would see me first. I pushed all the way and lunged out into a grove of pines. The night air was sharp and alive. Moonlight glanced off wet branches. I sprinted between trees until I found a gravel path that led back toward a chain-link fence. My boots slid over mud. I glanced back. The compound's walls rose behind me, silent. No lights, no hum, no movement, just stillness. I reached the fence, yanked it open, and dashed through the torn chain. My radio crackled to life. O'Neill, breathless, on the line. "Jesus Christ, where are you?" I panted. "Outside." I'm okay." He barked orders. "Get to the cruiser. We're pulling cameras, locking it down." I didn't argue. I collapsed against the fence, hands on my knees, breathing in deep lungfuls of pine-scented air. Afterward, at HQ, I checked the logs. CCTV showed me limping out through the gate, hands raised, but nothing else. No record of me inside the compound. No evidence of lights, no cameras, no biological tubes. Supplies and manifests listed decommissioned equipment only. The maintenance crew's logs made no mention of keycards, working fluorescent fixtures, or a working piped duct. The files on Project Echo were marked classified, destroyed. I've never gone back. Every night since, I hear that hum when I close my eyes, feel the shape drifting in the blue glow, and wonder whose face I saw pressed against that condensation. There's a file missing from evidence, my flashlight with its beam still warm to the touch, left behind on the control console. And I can't shake the voice that promised, "Please, listen." Now, when I drive by the old missile yards, the gate looks like it always did, rusted, forgotten. But every so often, I pause, and I swear I can hear the hum through the silence, calling me back to that blue-lit chamber, waiting to be heard.